The wagon wheel hit the rut at exactly the wrong angle. Lydia felt it before she saw it. That sickening lurch. The groan of old wood splitting under pressure it was never meant to bear. She grabbed for the rail, fingers scraping wet paint, but momentum had already claimed her. The whole platform tipped forward like a gallows trap, and she went with it, arms flailing, white dress billowing, straight down into 3 inches of Montana mud. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Mud filled her mouth, her nose, soaked through silk that had cost someone, not her, a small fortune. For one merciful second, there was only the cold shock of it, the desperate gasp for air. Then she heard the laughter. It started as a snicker from somewhere in the crowd, then another. Then it rolled through the gathered townspeople like wildfire through dry grass, building and building until it was a roar, a wave of sound that hit her harder than the ground had. Men doubled over. Women covered their mouths, shoulders shaking. Children pointed and howled. Lydia pushed herself up on her elbows, mud streaming down her face, and saw them all. Every person in Copperfield, Montana had turned out for this. Her wedding day, the event of the season, and now they'd never forget it. "Oh, sweet Jesus," someone wheezed between fits of laughter. "Did you see her face? Like a pig in a wallow. Should have used a sturdier wagon for that load." The insults came fast, overlapping, each one drawing fresh peals of laughter. Lydia stayed on her hands and knees, unable to move, unable to think past the roaring in her ears and the hot shame crawling up her spine. This wasn't new. The cruelty wasn't new. She'd been the joke of Copperfield for as long as she could remember. Poor Lydia. Homely Lydia. That heart girl, the unfortunate one. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her a house and 40 acres and nothing else. No mother to guide her, no brothers to protect her, no beauty to trade on, just land and the taxes that came with it, and a town full of people who'd watched her struggle for years with something too close to entertainment. By the time she turned 23, the offers had dried up completely. No suitors, no prospects, just mounting debts and winter coming on, and the very real possibility that she'd lose everything. Then Calvin Rourke had made his offer. Not a proposal, an offer. Clinical, transactional. He'd arrived at her door with his foreman and a contract already drawn up. Marry him, merge her land with his holdings, and she'd never want for anything again. Refuse, and, well, he hadn't said it outright, hadn't needed to. Everyone knew what happened to people who crossed Calvin Rourke. She'd signed 3 days later. And now here she was, face down in the mud in front of the entire town, and somewhere up on that hill, her future husband was watching. Lydia forced herself to look up. Calvin Rourke stood exactly where he'd been when the wagon collapsed, on the raised platform before the church, hands clasped behind his back, expression utterly neutral. He was 56 years old, built like a barrel, with iron gray hair and eyes the color of frozen river water. He owned half the county, controlled the other half. Men called him sir without being asked. He watched her the way someone might watch a horse with a broken leg. Calculating. Detached. Deciding. Their eyes met across 30 yards of churned mud and laughing faces. Lydia waited for him to move, to say something, to do anything that might suggest he gave a damn that his bride was being humiliated in front of the entire territory. Calvin Rourke turned his head and said something to the man beside him. The man nodded. Neither of them moved to help her. The laughter was dying down now, fading into scattered chuckles and whispered commentary. Someone, one of the wedding planners maybe, was shouting for people to clear a path. Hands reached for Lydia's arms, hauling her upright with more efficiency than kindness. "Get her inside," a woman's voice snapped. "We'll see what can be salvaged." Lydia's legs shook as they dragged her toward the church. Mud dripped from her hair, her dress, pooled in her shoes. She could feel every eye on her, could hear the whispers already starting. "Did you see?" Poor thing. Well, what did she expect, marrying Rourke? Desperate times. They hauled her through the side door into a small preparation room that smelled of old wood and candle wax. Someone thrust a towel at her. Someone else started unlacing the ruined dress with sharp, impatient tugs. "We have a spare," the woman, Mrs. Brennan, the seamstress, muttered. "It won't fit as well, but it'll have to do. Lord knows we can't send you down the aisle looking like you crawled out of a pig pen." Lydia stood there, numb, while they stripped her down to her chemise and scrubbed at her face and hands. The water in the basin turned brown. They worked in grim silence, like undertakers preparing a corpse. Through the thin walls, she could hear the crowd settling, the murmur of voices as people found their seats. The ceremony would go on. Of course it would. Calvin Rourke didn't cancel plans because of a little mud. There, Mrs. Brennan stepped back, surveying her work with a critical eye. It'll do. The veil will cover most of the damage to your hair. Lydia looked at herself in the small mirror. The spare dress was too tight across the shoulders, too loose at the waist. Her hair, hastily pinned, already threatened to come loose. There was still mud under her fingernails. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd run out of options. 5 minutes, Mrs. Brennan said, and left her alone. Lydia sank onto the wooden bench, the dress creaking around her. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to stop it, but the trembling just moved up her arms, into her chest, until her whole body was vibrating with something she couldn't name. Not fear. She'd made peace with the fear weeks ago. This was something else, something that tasted like bile and felt like a scream she couldn't let out. The door opened. Lydia looked up, expecting Mrs. Brennan. It wasn't Mrs. Brennan. The man in the doorway was tall, lean, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that looked like it had been carved with a dull knife, all hard angles and no softness. He wore plain work clothes, mud on his boots, no tie. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're Lydia Hart," he said. Not a question. Yes. Who are you?" "Jonah Pike." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." "I'm getting married in 5 minutes." "I know. That's why we need to talk." Lydia stood up, instinctively putting the bench between them. "I don't know you. You shouldn't be in here." "You're right on both counts." Jonah didn't move closer, but he didn't leave either. "But I saw what happened out there. I saw Rourke's face when you fell. And I saw yours when you looked at him. I don't know what you think you saw. I saw a woman realizing she's making a mistake." His voice was quiet, matter of fact. "A bad one. Maybe the kind you don't come back from." Heat flooded Lydia's face. "You don't know anything about me or my situation." "I know Calvin Rourke, that's enough." "Then you know I don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice." "Not everyone has your choices, Mr. Pike." The words came out sharper than she intended. "Some of us don't have the luxury of principles." Something flickered across his face. Not anger, but something close. "You think I don't know what it's like to be backed into a corner? I've been there, hell, I lived there for years, but marrying Rourke isn't a corner. It's a cage, and once you're in, he's not letting you out." "What do you care?" Lydia's hands had stopped shaking. Now they were clenched at her sides. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. So why are you here?" Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Outside, someone was playing the organ, the processional probably. Her cue would come any second. "Because I knew your father," he said finally. Lydia froze. "What?" "Thomas Hart. I worked for him briefly, about 15 years back. I was just a kid then, but he was a good man, fair, decent, the kind of man who didn't deserve what happened to him. My father died of fever." "Is that what they told you?" The room tilted. Lydia grabbed the edge of the bench. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your father died 3 weeks after he refused to sell his land to Calvin Rourke. I'm talking about the fact that the fever that killed him also killed 2 other men who'd stood up to Rourke that same year. I'm talking about—" "Stop." Lydia's voice cracked. "Just stop. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm trying to give you information you should have had years ago." "Why? Why now?" Her voice was rising, but she couldn't stop it. "My father's been dead for over a decade. If you knew something, if you had proof of anything, why wait until my wedding day?" "Because I only just found out you were marrying him." Jonah's jaw tightened. "I've been working a claim up north for the past 8 months. Got back into town yesterday. Heard about the wedding this morning, and I thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "I thought maybe someone should tell you before it's too late." "Tell me what? That my father might have been murdered? That Calvin Rourke might be responsible?" Lydia laughed, and it sounded unhinged even to her own ears. And what am I supposed to do with that information? Call off the wedding? Accuse the most powerful man in the territory of murder with no proof? Lose everything I have left? You could walk away. And go where? Do what? She was yelling now, all the fear and shame and rage of the past hour pouring out in a flood. I have 40 acres and a house I can't afford to heat, and debts I can't pay. Without this marriage, I lose everything. I become nothing, so forgive me if your suspicions about my father's death don't change the fact that I have no other options. The door burst open. Mrs. Brennan stood in the doorway, face flushed. What on earth is going on in here? Lydia, it's time. And you spoil... She glared at Jonah. Get out. Now. Jonah held Lydia's gaze for another moment. Then he nodded, once, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Your father's land. The 40 acres. Did you ever wonder why Rourke wants it so badly? It's not exactly prime cattle country. Mr. Pike, there's a deed, filed with the territorial office 8 years ago. Mineral rights. Your father discovered something on that land before he died, and he made sure it was documented. Rourke's been trying to get his hands on it ever since. Mrs. Brennan made a disgusted sound. This is absurd. Lydia, ignore this lunatic. Come on. But Lydia couldn't move. Mineral rights? What are you talking about? Copper, Jonah said quietly. Maybe silver. Your father never got a chance to confirm it, but the preliminary surveys were promising. Promising enough that Rourke's been buying up every adjacent property for years, waiting for you to either sell or marry someone he could control. The organ music swelled. Someone was calling her name. That's a lie, Lydia whispered. But even as she said it, pieces were falling into place. The intensity of Rourke's offer, the speed of it, the way he'd insisted on merging their land immediately upon marriage. Come on, child. Mrs. Brennan grabbed her arm. You're getting hysterical. The heat, the shock. You need to sit down. I'm not hysterical. Lydia pulled free, still staring at Jonah. If what you're saying is true, if there's really mineral rights and my father was killed for them, why hasn't anyone done anything? Why hasn't the law... But the law? Jonah's laugh was bitter. Rourke owns the sheriff, owns half the county commissioners. Who do you think would investigate? Then why tell me at all? What am I supposed to do with this? That's up to you. He tipped his head, a gesture that might have been a bow under different circumstances. But I figured you had a right to know what you're walking into. He left. The door swung shut behind him. Lydia stood there, dressed too tight, hair falling down, while Mrs. Brennan fussed and pulled and tried to arrange her into something presentable. The organ was playing the processional now. Her processional. Any second, someone would come to escort her down the aisle. Her mind was racing. Mineral rights. Murder. A decade of lies. Or the ravings of a stranger. She didn't know Jonah Pike. Didn't know his motives or his history. For all she knew, he was crazy, or vengeful, or working some angle she couldn't see. He'd offered no proof, no documentation, nothing but words and implications. But he'd known her father's name, known about the land. And Calvin Rourke hadn't moved when she fell, hadn't even blinked. There! Mrs. Brennan stepped back, slightly out of breath. That's the best we can do. You look acceptable. Now come on. They're waiting. The door opened again. This time, it was Mr. Brennan, the seamstress's husband, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was too small for him. He offered his arm. Lydia had no one to give her away, so he'd volunteered, or been volunteered. Miss Hart, he said gruffly. Ready? Was she? Lydia looked down at her hands, mud still under the nails. The hands of a woman who'd spent years working land she couldn't afford to keep, fighting a battle she was always going to lose. She thought about her father, tried to remember his face, and found she couldn't quite hold on to it anymore. 15 years was a long time. She thought about Calvin Rourke, the cold calculation in his eyes when she'd looked up at him from the mud. She thought about 40 acres and mineral rights, and the possibility, just the possibility, that everything she'd been told was a lie. Miss Hart? Mr. Brennan shifted his weight. They're waiting. Lydia took his arm. They walked to the church doors. Through the narrow windows, she could see the crowd, every seat filled, faces turned toward the aisle waiting for her entrance. At the far end, in front of the altar, Calvin Rourke stood with his hands clasped, expression neutral. The organ hit the opening chord. The doors swung wide. Lydia took one step forward, then another. The crowd rose, a wave of rustling fabric and creaking pews. She kept her eyes straight ahead, focused on the altar, on Rourke, on the future she'd agreed to. 3 steps. 4. 5. The dress was too tight. She couldn't breathe properly. Or maybe that was just panic. 7 steps. 8. Jonah Pike stood at the back of the church, just inside the door. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just watched her with that same intense focus. You could walk away. 10 steps. 11. At the front, Calvin Rourke was watching her approach. His expression hadn't changed. He looked at her the same way he'd looked at her in the mud, like a problem to be solved, an asset to be acquired. 15 steps. Lydia's feet stopped moving. Mr. Brennan tugged gently on her arm. Miss Hart? She couldn't do this. The thought hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't do this, couldn't walk down this aisle, couldn't speak those vows, couldn't spend the rest of her life with a man who'd watched her fall and felt nothing. Whether Jonah Pike was telling the truth or spinning lies, whether there were mineral rights or murder or nothing but coincidence, it didn't matter. Because standing here, looking at Calvin Rourke's face, Lydia knew with absolute certainty that marrying him would destroy whatever was left of her. I can't, she whispered. Mr. Brennan leaned closer. What? I can't do this. Louder now. Heads were turning, the whispers were starting. Miss Hart, you're just nervous, wedding jitters, perfectly normal. No. Lydia pulled her arm free. No, I'm not nervous. She looked up at Rourke. He was still watching her, but something had changed in his expression, a tightness around his mouth, the first crack in his composure. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. I can't marry you, Mr. Rourke. The church erupted. Gasps, shouts, the scrape of pews as people stood to get a better view. Mrs. Brennan let out a shriek. At the altar, Calvin Rourke's face went very still. Lydia! His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Come here. It wasn't a request. No, Lydia said. I'm sorry. I can't. I won't. She turned and ran. The crowd parted, out of shock maybe, or instinct. Lydia gathered up her skirts and bolted for the door, shoes slipping on the polished floor, dress tearing as she went. Behind her, Rourke was shouting something, but she couldn't make out the words over the roar in her ears. She hit the doors at full speed, slamming them open, and burst out into gray afternoon light, and stopped. There were men on horses surrounding the church, 6 of them, all wearing the same rough work clothes, all watching the door with the casual alertness of people who'd been told to expect trouble. Rourke's men. The closest one, a thick-necked man with a scarred face, grinned at her. Going somewhere, miss? Lydia looked left, right. More horses. More men. They'd surrounded the building while the ceremony was starting. While she was inside, they'd built a cage. The church doors opened behind her. Calvin Rourke stepped out, moving with deliberate calm. His eyes found hers. Lydia, he said quietly, you're making a scene. I don't care. Yes, you do. You've always cared very much what people think. It's why you're here in the first place. He descended the steps slowly. Now, we're going to go back inside. We're going to finish this ceremony, and tomorrow, when you've had time to calm down, we'll discuss your concerns. I'm not marrying you. Yes, you are. He was close now, close enough that she could smell pipe tobacco and pomade. Because the alternative is that you lose everything. Your land, your home, everything your father left you. And winter's coming, Lydia. You won't survive it alone. Maybe not. Her voice shook, but she held his gaze. But I'll survive it free. Something dark flashed across Rourke's face. Take her inside, he said to the men. They moved fast, dismounting, closing in. Lydia backed up against the church doors, looking for an escape and finding none. The thick-necked man reached for her arm. A gunshot cracked the air. Everyone froze. Jonah Pike stood 20 feet away, revolver aimed at the sky, smoke curling from the barrel. He lowered it slowly, deliberately, until it was pointed at the ground, but his hand stayed on the grip. That's far enough, he said. Rourke turned, his expression darkening. Pike, I should have known. This is your doing. This is her doing. I just gave her information. She made her own choice. Information? Is that what you call spreading lies about me? Is that what you call the truth? Jonah's eyes were hard. Funny how you haven't denied anything yet. The men were shifting now, hands moving toward weapons. Jonah saw it and shook his head slightly. I wouldn't. The whole town's watching, and there's at least 3 witnesses with rifles in windows across the street. You make a move, this turns into something you can't control. It was a bluff. Lydia could see it in the tension in Jonah's shoulders, the way his weight was balanced on the balls of his feet. He was alone, outnumbered, and if Rourke's men rushed him, he might get one shot off before they took him down. But Rourke didn't know that. Or maybe he did, but the risk wasn't worth it. Not here, not now, not with witnesses. This isn't over, Rourke said quietly. Lydia, you walk away now and you lose everything. Everything. I'll make sure of it. Then I lose everything. Lydia's voice was steadier now. It won't be the first time. She walked down the steps, past Rourke, past his men. Jonah fell into step beside her, gun still in his hand, watching the men for any sign of movement. They made it to the edge of the square before Rourke's voice rang out behind them. You're a dead woman, Lydia Hart. You and anyone fool enough to help you. Lydia didn't look back. She kept walking, kept moving, until they'd turned the corner and the church was out of sight. Then her legs gave out. Jonah caught her before she hit the ground, holding her up with one arm while he holstered his gun with the other. I've got you, he said quietly. I've got you. Lydia was shaking again, great racking tremors that felt like they'd tear her apart. She'd just destroyed her life, thrown away her only chance at stability, made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory, and she couldn't feel anything but relief. I need to get out of here, she managed. I don't know where to go. My place, Jonah said. It's not much, but it's outside town. Rourke won't move tonight. Too many witnesses. But come tomorrow. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Why are you helping me? Lydia pulled back enough to look at him. Why do you care? Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then, because someone should have helped your father and no one did. I was just a kid, but I should have said something, done something. I didn't. So maybe this is me trying to make up for that. Or maybe, he stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter. What matters is getting you somewhere safe before Rourke decides witnesses aren't enough to stop him. A horse and wagon were waiting at the end of the street. Jonah helped her up, then climbed into the driver's seat. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking, carrying them away from the church, the town, the life she'd almost condemned herself to. Lydia looked back once. She could see people spilling out of the church, could hear raised voices, could imagine Rourke's face as he realized she was really gone. Then they rounded a bend, and Copperfield disappeared behind them. The rain started half an hour later, a cold, driving rain that turned the road to mud and soaked through Lydia's ruined wedding dress in minutes. Jonah didn't slow down. He kept the horse moving at a steady pace, navigating ruts and washouts with the ease of someone who'd traveled this road 1,000 times. Lydia sat beside him, shivering, watching the landscape blur past, rolling hills, scattered trees, the vast, indifferent Montana sky. Tell me about my father, she said finally. Jonah glanced at her, then back at the road. What do you want to know? Everything you remember. So he told her. About the summer he'd worked for Thomas Hart, mending fences and clearing brush. About her father's kindness, his fairness, the way he'd treated a 15-year-old drifter like an actual person instead of free labor. About the day Rourke had shown up with an offer to buy the land, and the way Thomas had refused without hesitation. He said some things aren't for sale, Jonah said quietly. Said that land was for you, for your future, and he'd be damned before he let anyone take it from you. Lydia's throat tightened. She'd been 12 when her father died, old enough to remember, too young to understand. The fever had come on fast, they'd said, 3 days from healthy to dead. It happened sometimes, especially out here, where doctors were scarce and medicine was expensive. But if Jonah was right, if it hadn't been fever at all, how do I prove it, she asked. Any of it? The mineral rights, the murder? How do I prove any of it? I don't know, Jonah admitted. The deed should be on file with the territorial office, but getting access to those records... He shook his head. Rourke has friends there. Even if we found proof, I don't know that we could use it. Then what do I do? Survive. Jonah's jaw was tight. First you survive. Then we figure out the rest. They rode in silence after that. The rain eased to a drizzle, then stopped altogether, leaving everything dripping and gray. The sun was setting by the time Jonah turned the wagon onto a narrow track that led up into the hills. His place was small, a cabin, a barn, a corral with 2 horses watching their approach with mild interest. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin ribbon. Someone was home. My foreman, Jonah explained, seeing her look. Sam Reeves, well, you'll see. He's good people. The door opened before they reached it. A man stepped out, older than Jonah, maybe 60, with gray hair and a face weathered by years of sun and wind. His eyes went to Lydia, took in the ruined dress and muddy shoes, and his expression didn't change at all. Sam, Jonah said, this is Lydia Hart. She'll be staying with us for a while. Sam nodded once. Miss Hart, welcome. You look like you could use some coffee and dry clothes. I'll heat water for a bath. He disappeared back inside without waiting for a response. Jonah helped Lydia down from the wagon, and they followed Sam into the cabin. It was clean, spare, functional. 1 main room with a fireplace and a table, 2 smaller rooms branching off, bedrooms probably. Sam was already stoking the fire, setting a kettle to boil. You can have my room, Jonah said. I'll bunk with Sam. It's not fancy, but it's perfect. Lydia sank into a chair by the fire, suddenly exhausted. Every muscle ached, her head pounded. She felt like she'd been running for days instead of hours. Sam brought her coffee in a tin cup. It was strong, bitter, exactly what she needed. She wrapped her hands around it and let the heat seep into her fingers. Thank you, she said quietly. Both of you. I know you're taking a risk helping me. Risk's relative, Sam said. He had a gravelly voice, like boots on gravel. Jonah's been itching for a fight with Rourke for years. You just gave him an excuse. Sam, Jonah started, don't Sam me. You know it's true. The older man turned to Lydia. Jonah's got a grudge against Rourke that goes back further than your father, though I suspect that's part of it too. So don't think you're putting us out. We're right where we want to be. Lydia looked between them. What grudge? Jonah's expression closed off. Old history. Doesn't matter now. It matters if Rourke's coming after us because of it. He's coming after us because you embarrassed him in front of the whole town, Sam said bluntly. That's all the reason a man like Rourke needs. The rest is just details. The kettle whistled. Sam poured hot water into a basin, then gestured toward one of the bedrooms. Bath's ready when you are, miss. I'll find you something to wear. Won't fit perfect, but it'll be dry. Lydia stood, legs shaky. The exhaustion was crushing now, pressing down on her like a physical weight. Thank you, she said again, because she didn't know what else to say. In the small bedroom, she stripped off the ruined wedding dress and left it in a heap on the floor. The water was hot, clean, perfect. She scrubbed mud from her hair, from under her nails, from places she hadn't even realized were dirty. When she finally climbed out, there was a set of men's clothes laid out on the bed. Rough wool pants, a cotton shirt, socks. All too big, but she didn't care. She dressed, wrung out her hair, and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was quiet. Outside, she could hear Jonah and Sam talking in low voices, could smell something cooking, stew maybe, or beans. Normal sounds, domestic sounds. For the first time in years, Lydia let herself cry. Not the panicked, hysterical tears of earlier, but something deeper, something that had been building for so long she'd forgotten it was there. She cried for her father, for the life she'd almost thrown away, for the terror and relief of what she'd just done. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out, empty, clean. There was a soft knock on the door. Lydia? Jonah's voice. Food's ready if you're hungry. I'll be right there. She stood, squared her shoulders, and walked out to face whatever came next. They ate in near silence, stew and bread that Sam had baked that morning. Lydia was hungrier than she'd realized. She finished one bowl, then another, and when Sam offered thirds, she didn't refuse. You've got an appetite, Sam observed. That's good. You'll need your strength. For what? For whatever happens when Rourke finds us. Sam said it matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather.
He'll come. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Man like that doesn't let an insult slide. He said I was a dead woman. He says a lot of things. Jonah pushed his bowl away. Most of them are threats he can't follow through on. Killing you would make him a murderer in front of witnesses. He won't risk that. Unless he makes it look like an accident, Sam said, or self-defense, or, Sam, you're not helping. I'm being realistic. The old man stood, gathering dishes.
Miss Hart needs to know what she's up against. Sugarcoating it doesn't do her any favors. Lydia set down her spoon. He's right. I need to know. All of it. What Rourke's capable of, what you think he'll do, what our options are. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and leaned back in his chair. Rourke's smart, careful. He doesn't get his own hands dirty if he can help it. He'll send men, probably the same ones who were at the church. They'll try to scare you first, make you think coming back is your only option. If that doesn't work, he paused. If that doesn't work, they'll escalate. Property damage, threats, maybe worse. And if I go to the law? The sheriff's on Rourke's payroll, has been for years. You go to him, and he'll either ignore you or haul you back to Rourke himself. Then what do I do? You fight, Sam said from the wash basin. You dig in, you hold your ground, and you fight.
With what? I don't have money. I don't have weapons. I don't have... You have us, Jonah interrupted. And you have your land. That deed Jonah mentioned, the mineral rights. If we can get our hands on it, if we can prove what your father discovered, that's leverage. Rourke wants that land badly enough to marry you for it. That means it's worth something. Lydia thought about that. 40 acres. The house she'd grown up in. The land her father had died protecting, maybe literally. How do we get the deed, she asked. Territorial office in Helena. It's a 3-day ride from here, longer if the weather turns. Jonah met her eyes. It's a risk. We'd be leaving Sam here alone. And if Rourke's men come while we're gone, I can handle myself, Sam said flatly. You two worry about getting that deed. I'll worry about keeping this place standing. It's not just the deed, Lydia said slowly, thinking it through. Even if we get it, even if it proves there are mineral rights, that doesn't prove Rourke killed my father. It doesn't prove anything except that the land is valuable. One step at a time, Jonah said. First we get proof of what you own. Then we figure out how to keep you alive long enough to use it. It wasn't reassuring, but it was a plan, which was more than Lydia had had an hour ago. When do we leave? She asked. Tomorrow, early, before Rourke has time to organize. Jonah stood. You should get some sleep. It's going to be a long few days. Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to plan, wanted to do something useful, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. She nodded and retreated to the small bedroom, closing the door behind her. The bed was narrow, the blanket rough, the pillow flat. It was the most comfortable thing she'd ever felt. She was asleep in seconds. Lydia woke to the sound of horses. Not the gentle shuffling of animals in a corral, but the hard rhythm of hooves on packed earth, multiple riders moving fast. She sat up, heart already racing, and reached for clothes that weren't hers in a room that wasn't hers in a life that had become unrecognizable in less than 24 hours. The sky outside was barely gray. Dawn was still an hour off. She stumbled to the door and opened it. Jonah was already up, standing at the window with a rifle in his hands. Sam was loading another one, movements quick and practiced. How many? Sam asked without looking up. 4, maybe 5. Jonah's voice was flat. They're not trying to be quiet. Rourke's men? Who else would it be? Lydia crossed to the window. In the dim pre-dawn light, she could make out riders approaching from the east, spread out in a loose line. They weren't rushing, weren't charging. They were coming steady and inevitable, like a storm front. I thought you said he wouldn't move this fast, Lydia said. I was wrong. Jonah handed her the rifle he'd been holding. You know how to use this? My father taught me. Her hands remembered the weight, the balance. It had been years, but some things you didn't forget. Good. Stay inside. If shooting starts, get low and stay low. What are you going to do? Talk to them. Maybe we can avoid this turning into something that gets people killed. And if we can't? Jonah looked at her. In the weak light, his face was all shadows and hard lines. Then we make sure we're not the ones who die. He went out onto the porch. Sam followed, rifle loose in his hands, positioning himself near the corner where he had a clean line of sight to the approaching riders. Lydia stayed at the window, watching, the rifle heavy across her lap. The riders slowed as they reached the yard, horses blowing and stamping. The man in front was the thick-necked one from the church, the one who'd grinned at her when she'd tried to run. He looked less amused now. "Pike," he called out, "we're here for the woman." "She's not interested in visitors," Jonah said. "Wasn't asking what she's interested in. Mr. Rourke wants to talk to her." "Then Mr. Rourke can send a written invitation like a civilized person." The thick-necked man, Lydia still didn't know his name, leaned forward in his saddle.
"You're making this harder than it needs to be. We've got no quarrel with you. Just send her out and we'll be on our way." "No." Pike, I said no. She doesn't want to see Rourke, doesn't want to talk to him, doesn't want anything to do with him. That clear enough for you, or do I need to use smaller words? One of the other riders laughed. The thick-necked man's face darkened. "You've got a smart mouth. Someone should have taught you to keep it shut. People have tried."
Jonah's tone didn't change. "Didn't take. Maybe we'll try harder. Maybe you'll ride back to Rourke and tell him Lydia Hart isn't his property. Never was. Never will be." Jonah shifted his weight, and Lydia saw the revolver at his hip, the way his hand rested near it. "Or maybe you'll try something stupid, and we'll see how that works out for you." The riders spread out slightly. Not obvious, but deliberate, flanking. Lydia's hands tightened on the rifle.
"There's 5 of us and 2 of you," the thick-necked man said. 3 if the woman can shoot. You like those odds?" "I like them better than you do," Sam said from the corner of the porch. His voice was casual, almost friendly. "See, you boys are out in the open. We've got cover. And I spent 3 years as a sharpshooter in the war. Want to guess which one of you I'd hit first?" The thick-necked man's jaw worked. "This is stupid. We're just here to talk." "Then talk." "To the woman. Not to you." "Not happening." The standoff stretched. Lydia could see the calculations happening on the riders' faces, weighing odds, considering options, wondering if this was worth dying over. She'd seen that same look on men's faces at poker tables, watching them decide whether to fold or call a bluff they suspected wasn't a bluff at all. Finally, the thick-necked man spat into the dirt. "You're making a mistake, Pike, both of you. Mr. Rourke's not a patient man. I'll try to sleep through the worry. The woman's got no claim to that land. Marriage contract was signed. It's legal." "She didn't say her vows. Contract's void." "That's for lawyers to decide." "Then tell Rourke to get a lawyer instead of sending thugs." The thick-necked man's face went red. For a second, Lydia thought he'd go for his gun, thought this whole thing would explode into violence right there in Jonah's yard. But one of the other riders, younger, nervous-looking, put a hand on his arm. "Let's go, Dutch. This ain't what we came for." Dutch. So that was his name. Dutch shook off the younger man's hand but didn't draw. Instead, he pointed at Jonah, the gesture sharp and full of promise. "This isn't over." "Never thought it was." The riders turned their horses and rode off, slower than they'd come, taking their time about it. Making a point. Lydia watched until they disappeared over the ridge, and even then, she couldn't quite unclench her hands from the rifle. Jonah came back inside. Sam stayed on the porch, watching. "They'll be back," Jonah said. "Probably with more men next time. We need to leave. Now." "I thought we were leaving at dawn." "Dawn's too late. We go now, while they're still riding back to report to Rourke. Gives us maybe a 3-hour head start. 4 if we're lucky." Lydia stood. The exhaustion she'd felt last night was gone, burned away by adrenaline and fear. "What do I need to bring?" "Nothing you can't carry on a horse. We're traveling light and fast." She went back to the bedroom, looking for something, anything that belonged to her. But there was nothing. The wedding dress was ruined. Everything else, her clothes, her possessions, her entire life, was back at her house in Copperfield, and she couldn't go back there. Not now. Maybe not ever. She came out empty-handed. Jonah saw and nodded like he'd expected it. "Sam's packing supplies. We'll have enough for the trip to Helena and back. After that..." He didn't finish. After that, they'd figure it out. Or they wouldn't. Lydia was getting used to not knowing what came next. Sam brought out saddlebags stuffed with jerky, hardtack, coffee, ammunition. Jonah saddled 2 horses while Sam loaded a third as a pack animal. The sky was lightening now, gray turning to pale blue at the edges. Beautiful morning, terrible timing. You watch yourself, Sam said to Jonah. Don't do anything stupid. Since when do I do stupid things? Since you decided to pick a fight with Calvin Rourke over a woman you met yesterday. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He finished with the saddles and turned to Lydia. You ever ridden long distance? Not in years. It's going to hurt, no way around it. We've got 3 days of hard riding ahead, maybe more if we run into weather or trouble. You need to tell me if you can't keep up. I can keep up. Lydia, I said I can keep up. She took the reins of the nearest horse, a gray mare with intelligent eyes. Let's go before they come back with reinforcements. They mounted up. Sam handed Jonah a rifle and a revolver, both loaded. You run into real trouble. Don't try to be a hero. Just get clear and keep moving.
You going to be all right here alone? I'm always all right. Sam stepped back, giving them room. Go on. And Pike, bring her back alive. Jonah nodded once, then turned his horse east. Lydia followed. They left the cabin at a trot, then pushed into a canter as soon as the terrain allowed. The pack horse followed on a lead rope, protesting but keeping pace. They rode for 2 hours without stopping. Lydia's thighs burned, her back ached, her hands cramped on the reins. She didn't complain. Jonah kept glancing back, checking the horizon for pursuit, and she did the same. Every distant dust cloud looked like riders. Every bird that startled from the brush sounded like hoofbeats. But nothing came. The morning stretched out, clear and cold, and they kept moving. Around mid-morning, Jonah finally slowed to a walk. The horses were lathered, breathing hard. Lydia's mare tossed her head, grateful for the break. We'll rest here, Jonah said, dismounting near a narrow creek. Water the horses, eat something, then we keep going. Lydia slid off her horse and nearly fell. Her legs had gone numb. She caught herself on the saddle, waiting for feeling to return, and when it did, it came as stabbing pins and needles that made her gasp. First day's always the worst, Jonah said. He was loosening his horse's girth, giving the animal room to breathe. Tomorrow, you'll be sore. Day after that, you'll be past sore into some new territory where everything just hurts all the time. Then your body gives up complaining and you feel normal again. How encouraging. I don't believe in lying to make people feel better. They let the horses drink, then hobbled them to graze while they sat on a fallen log and ate jerky that tasted like leather and hardtack that was only slightly softer. Lydia forced it down, knowing she needed the energy, hating every bite. Tell me about the mineral rights, she said. How did you find out about them? Jonah chewed slowly, thinking. Your father told me. Not directly. He wasn't the type to brag. But one day we were digging post holes and he found this rock. Had copper running through it, bright green streaks. He got real quiet, real focused. Sent me back to the house for something, and when I came back, the rock was gone and he was working like nothing happened. But I saw his face. He'd found something. That's it? One rock? One rock was enough to make him start asking questions, doing surveys, quiet-like, so no one would notice. But I noticed. And apparently Rourke did too. Lydia stared at the creek, watching water slide over stones. If my father knew the land was valuable, why didn't he develop it? Why leave me with nothing but debt? Because developing a mine takes money, equipment, workers, things your father didn't have. And the minute he tried to get them, word would have spread. Rourke would have known. Jonah tossed a pebble into the water. I think your father was waiting, saving evidence, documenting everything, planning to develop it when you were old enough to help. He just didn't get the chance. Because Rourke killed him. I can't prove that. But you believe it. Jonah looked at her. Yeah, I believe it. The words hung between them. Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to demand proof, wanted something more than belief and suspicion. But she'd seen Rourke's face when she'd fallen. Had felt the cold calculation in his marriage offer. Some things you didn't need proof for. You just knew. If we get this deed, she said slowly, what then? Rourke's still the most powerful man in the territory. Having proof won't change that. No, but it'll change your position. Right now, you're just a woman who embarrassed him.
Get that deed, prove what you own, and you become a threat. Someone who could develop that land yourself. Sell the rights to someone else. Cut him out entirely. Jonah stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. It won't make you safe, but it might make you powerful enough that killing you becomes more trouble than it's worth. Might. Might's the best I can offer. They mounted up again. Lydia's body screamed protest, but she gritted her teeth and swung into the saddle. The gray mare shifted beneath her, patient, waiting. They rode. The day blurred into a sequence of small pains and mounting exhaustion. Walk the horses, trot, canter when the ground was good, rest, water, eat, mount up again. Lydia's world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats, the creak of leather, the endless roll of Montana landscape. Hills, valleys, scattered trees, sky that went on forever. Jonah didn't talk much. When he did, it was practical, pointing out landmarks, explaining the route, warning about rough ground ahead. He was focused, efficient, scanning their surroundings constantly for threats. Once, he pulled up short and studied the horizon for a full 5 minutes before deciding it was safe to continue. "What did you see?" Lydia asked. "Nothing. That's what worries me. We should have seen more travelers by now. Ranch hands, freight wagons, someone. This route's usually busier. Maybe we're just early." "Maybe." But he didn't sound convinced. They made camp that night in a hollow between two hills, out of sight from any road or trail. No fire. Jonah said the light could be seen for miles. They ate cold food and drank water from canteens, sitting in darkness broken only by starlight. Lydia hurt everywhere. Her legs, her back, her hands blistered from the rains. Even her teeth ached from gritting them for hours. She wrapped herself in a blanket and tried to find a position that didn't make something scream. "You did good today," Jonah said from somewhere in the darkness. "Better than I expected. I can barely move. But you're still moving. That's what matters." Lydia closed her eyes. The ground was hard beneath her, the blanket thin. She'd never been more uncomfortable in her life. But she was alive. She was free, and somewhere ahead of them was proof that her father hadn't died for nothing. She slept in fits and starts, waking at every sound, wind in the grass, horses shifting, Jonah's quiet movements as he kept watch. When dawn came, she felt worse than she had the night before. "Day 2, Jonah said, handing her coffee that he'd somehow made without a fire. It was lukewarm and tasted like dirt, but the caffeine helped. "How you feeling?" "Like I got trampled by a herd of cattle." "Good, that means you're alive." He smiled slightly, the first time she'd seen anything close to humor from him. "Finish that, then we ride. We need to make Helena by tomorrow night." The second day was harder than the first. Lydia's muscles had stiffened overnight, and every movement felt like tearing something loose. But Jonah was right. After a few hours in the saddle, something gave way. Not the pain exactly, but her relationship to it. She stopped fighting it, stopped tensing against it, just let it exist while she focused on staying upright and keeping pace. They saw riders twice that day. Both times, Jonah led them off the main trail and into cover until the riders passed. The first group was a freight wagon with 2 guards. The second was 4 men on horseback, moving fast, rifles visible. "Rorks?" Lydia whispered. "Maybe. Or bounty hunters. Or just ranch hands in a hurry." Jonah watched them disappear over a ridge. "Can't take chances." They didn't return to the trail after that. Jonah navigated by landmarks Lydia couldn't identify. A particular tree line, a rock formation, the shape of distant mountains. He seemed to know every inch of this country, reading it like a book. "You grew up here?" she asked during one of their brief rest stops. "Not here exactly, but close enough. My family had a homestead about 50 miles south. We lost it when I was 16. "Lost it how?" Jonah's expression closed down. "The way people lose things out here, drought, debt, bad luck." He stood, ending the conversation. "We should keep moving." But Lydia had heard what he didn't say. Not just bad luck, something deliberate. Something that still burned. That night they camped near a stream. Jonah allowed a small fire this time, just enough to heat coffee and warm some beans. They ate in silence, both too tired for conversation. Lydia's hands shook as she held her tin plate. She couldn't tell if it was exhaustion or delayed shock from everything that had happened in the past 2 days. "You're thinking about going back,"
Jonah said suddenly. Lydia looked up. What? To Rourke. You're wondering if this is worth it. If maybe marrying him would have been easier than running for the rest of your life. How do you... Because I've seen that look before. Hell, I felt it myself.
He poured more coffee, the ground swirling dark in the bottom of the pot. After we lost our homestead, I thought about going back to the man who'd taken it, offering to work for him just to have a roof over my head. Would have been easier than scraping by, doing odd jobs, never knowing where the next meal was coming from. Why didn't you? Because I knew what it would cost. Not money I didn't have anyway, but something else. The part of me that said I deserved better than being someone's charity case, or their property. He met her eyes across the fire. You go back to Rourke, and maybe you survive. Maybe you even live comfortably, but you'll be his, not your own. And eventually you'll forget there was ever a difference. Lydia's throat tightened. I wasn't thinking about going back. Yes, you were. And that's fine, it's human. But I need you to decide now before we get to Helena. Because once we get that deed, once we show our hand, there's no going back. Rourke will know what we're doing, and he'll come at us with everything he has. I know. Do you? Because this isn't just about you anymore. Sam's back there alone. I'm here, making myself Rourke's enemy. You change your mind halfway through, people could die. The words were harsh, but Jonah's tone wasn't. He was just stating facts, laying out reality in a way that demanded honesty. Lydia thought about the mud, the laughter, Rourke's cold eyes watching her fall and feeling nothing. She thought about her father, dead for over a decade, and the possibility that he'd been murdered for land she was supposed to inherit. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 days ago, desperate enough to marry a man she didn't love just to survive. I'm not going back, she said. Not to him. Not to that life. Whatever happens, I'm seeing this through. Jonah studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, get some sleep. We've got a long day tomorrow. They reached the outskirts of Helena late the following afternoon. The territorial capital was bigger than Copperfield, busier, full of people who didn't know Lydia's face or care about her humiliation. It should have felt like sanctuary. Instead, it felt exposed. We'll get a room, Jonah said, somewhere cheap and quiet. Tomorrow we go to the territorial office, get the deed, and get out. That simple? Probably not, but that's the plan. They found a boarding house on the edge of town. 2 rooms, shabby but clean, run by a woman who asked no questions as long as they paid in advance. Lydia collapsed on the narrow bed and didn't move for an hour. When she finally got up, Jonah was waiting in the hallway. There's a bathhouse down the street, he said. Costs extra, but you look like you could use it. Lydia almost cried at the thought of hot water. I don't have any money. I do. Go. Take your time. We're safe here tonight. The bathhouse was heaven. Lydia soaked until her skin pruned, scrubbing away 3 days of dirt and sweat and fear. When she finally emerged, clean and dressed in borrowed clothes that actually fit, she felt almost human. She found Jonah in the boarding house's small dining room, eating stew and talking quietly with an old man who looked vaguely familiar. The conversation stopped when she approached. Lydia, Jonah said, this is Henry Watts. He used to work for your father. Lydia sat down slowly, studying the old man. He had watery blue eyes and gnarled hands that shook slightly as he held his spoon. Mr. Watts, I don't remember you. No reason you would, miss. I only worked that one summer, helped with the harvest. But your father was a good man, fair. When I heard you were in town, I wanted to offer what help I can. How did you know I was here? Jonah shifted uncomfortably. I sent word ahead, called in some favors. Henry's been working at the territorial office for the past 5 years. He can help us get access to the deed records without raising flags. Without raising flags, meaning illegally? Meaning quietly, Henry said. His voice was reedy but firm. The records are public. You've got a right to see them. But if word gets back to certain people that you're looking, well, that could cause problems. Problems meaning Rourke has people here too. Rourke has people everywhere, miss. Man like that doesn't stay powerful by accident. Lydia looked at Jonah. You trust him? With my life. Henry's good people. The old man ducked his head. I owed your father a debt.
He helped me when nobody else would. This is me trying to pay it back, even if it's 15 years too late. Something in Lydia's chest loosened slightly. Not everyone in Montana was corrupt or cruel or indifferent. Some people still remembered kindness.
Still tried to repay it. Thank you, she said quietly. Anything you can do to help, I'm grateful for. Henry nodded. The office opens at 8. I'll meet you there at 7 before the clerks arrive. We'll have maybe 30 minutes to search before people start showing up. If we find the deed, we copy it. I've got paper and ink ready. Original stays in the files. That way, no one knows we've been there. And if Rourke's people find out anyway, then we deal with it when it happens. Jonah's tone left no room for argument. But one step at a time. First, we get the proof. Then we worry about staying alive long enough to use it. They finished eating in silence. Henry left first, slipping out into the evening with a nod. Jonah and Lydia climbed the stairs to their separate rooms. At her door, Jonah paused. You should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be dangerous, I know. Lydia managed a tired smile. Everything's dangerous now. Yeah, but we're still breathing. He hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, I think your father would be proud. What you did, walking away from that wedding. Standing up to Rourke, that took guts. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Lydia watched him disappear into his own room, then went inside and locked the door. The bed was softer than the ground, softer than Jonah's cabin, softer than anything she'd slept on in the past 3 days. She should have fallen asleep immediately. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what came next. The deed, the proof, the confrontation that would follow. Rourke wasn't going to let this go. Even if they got the evidence, even if they could prove the land was valuable and rightfully hers, he'd find a way to take it. Men like him always did, unless she fought back harder than he expected. Unless she became the kind of threat he couldn't ignore or eliminate. Lydia didn't know how to do that yet, but she'd learn. She had to. Sleep took her sometime after midnight, dragging her down into dreams full of mud and laughter and cold eyes, watching her fall. When she woke, the sky outside was still dark. She dressed quickly, fumbling with buttons in the dim light, and went downstairs. Jonah was already there, drinking coffee that looked strong enough to strip paint. Ready? He asked. No, but let's go anyway. They walked through empty streets to the territorial office, a square brick building that looked official and intimidating in the pre-dawn darkness. Henry was waiting by the side door, a ring of keys in his shaking hands. No one's here yet, he whispered. We've got maybe 20 minutes before the first clerk shows up. Follow me. Inside, the office smelled of paper and ink and old wood. Henry led them through corridors lined with filing cabinets, past desks covered in documents, into a back room where floor-to-ceiling shelves held leather-bound record books. Land deeds are organized by county and year, Henry explained, running his finger along spines. Hart property would be filed under here. He pulled out a massive book, nearly dropping it. Jonah caught it, and together they carried it to a desk. Henry flipped pages, squinting in the lamplight. 1855, 1856, here. Thomas Hart. 40 acres, Copperfield region. He traced the entry with one finger. Purchase deed, property description, survey notes. He turned the page, turned another, frowned. Wait. What? Lydia leaned closer. There should be an addendum. Your father filed mineral rights documentation in 1859. I remember processing it myself, but it's not here. Jonah's expression darkened. Someone removed it. Or it was never filed properly. But Henry didn't sound convinced. He flipped through more pages, checking adjacent entries, looking for anything out of place. This doesn't make sense. I remember the filing. I remember your father's signature. Could it have been moved? Misfiled? Possible, but not likely. These records are checked quarterly. Someone would have noticed. Henry closed the book, shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, miss. I was certain it would be here. Lydia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Rourke got to it first. He knew we'd come looking, so he had someone remove it. Or he removed it years ago, Jonah said grimly. Soon as your father died, covered his tracks before anyone could question what happened. Then this was all for nothing. We came all this way, and there's no proof. There's always proof. Henry straightened his back. If the record was removed, there's still evidence it existed. Cross-references, survey maps, tax records, something. Can you find it? Maybe, but not in 20 minutes. I'd need days, weeks possibly. We don't have weeks. Jonah was already moving toward the door. Rourke knows we're here by now. He'll have men coming. We need to... The front door of the office slammed open. They froze. Voices echoed through the building, multiple men, boots on wood floors, coming closer. Henry's face went white. Back door through the storage room. Go. Now. Jonah grabbed Lydia's arm. They ran, weaving through corridors, Henry leading them with surprising speed for a man his age. Behind them, the voices got louder. Someone was shouting orders. They burst into a storage room stacked with boxes and old furniture. Henry pointed to a narrow door in the back corner. Leads to the alley, 3 blocks south. There's a livery stable. A man named Cooper owes me a favor. Tell him I sent you. He'll get you horses. What about you? Lydia asked. I'll be fine. I work here. I've got an excuse to be here. You don't. Go. Jonah pulled Lydia through the door and into the alley. Morning light was just starting to break over the rooftops, turning everything gray and harsh. They ran south, cutting through alleys and side streets, putting distance between them and the territorial office. Behind them, a shout went up. They'd been spotted. Run! Jonah pushed her forward. Lydia's legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she ran. Across streets, around corners, through yards where dogs barked and chickens scattered. The livery stable appeared ahead, a weathered building with horses visible through open doors. They burst inside. A man looked up from mucking a stall, older, bald, wearing a leather apron. Cooper? Jonah gasped. Henry Watts sent us. We need horses. Now! Cooper didn't ask questions. He just moved, opening stall doors, leading out 2 saddled horses like he'd been expecting them. Paid through noon. After that, you're on your own. Trail west leads out of town. Stay off the main roads. They mounted. Lydia's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. Through the stable doors, she could see men running down the street, searching. Go! Cooper slapped the rump of Jonah's horse. They exploded out of the stable at a gallop, scattering pedestrians, nearly colliding with a freight wagon. Behind them, someone shouted. A gunshot cracked the air, the bullet whining past Lydia's head. She leaned low over her horse's neck and rode harder than she'd ever ridden in her life. They tore through Helena's outskirts and into open country, horses stretched out full speed, the town disappearing behind them. More gunshots, but they were getting distant now, falling short. Jonah led them off the main trail and into rough country, rocky ground that made pursuit difficult, terrain that favored people who knew it. After an hour of hard riding, he finally slowed. Are they following? Lydia could barely get the words out. Jonah studied their back trail. Don't see anyone, but they'll come. We just made ourselves Rourke's #1 problem. We didn't even get the deed. No, but we proved it existed, and that Rourke went to the trouble of hiding it. Jonah's jaw was tight. That's something. It's not enough. It's what we've got. He turned his horse west. Come on, we need to get back to Sam before Rourke's men find him. They rode through the morning and into the afternoon, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. Lydia's mind churned. No deed, no proof, just suspicions and circumstantial evidence that wouldn't hold up in any court, especially not against a man like Calvin Rourke. They'd risked everything and gained nothing, except now Rourke knew they were looking, knew they suspected him. And men who felt threatened didn't wait around for threats to materialize. They acted first. By the time they stopped to rest the horses, Lydia had made a decision. It crystallized slowly, piece by piece, until it was the only thing she could see clearly. We can't run forever, she said. Jonah was checking his horse's hooves. I know. And we can't prove what Rourke did. Not without the deed. I know that too. So what do we do? Jonah straightened, meeting her eyes. We make him come to us. We stop running and start fighting. How? I don't know yet. His smile was grim. But we've got 2 days to figure it out before we're back at the cabin. And then, one way or another, this ends. They smelled the smoke before they saw it. Jonah pulled up short, hand raised to stop Lydia behind him. The wind carried ash and the acrid stink of burned wood across the hills. He didn't say anything, just kicked his horse into a gallop and tore toward the ridge that overlooked his property. Lydia followed, her stomach already sinking. When they crested the ridge, the cabin was still standing. That was the only good news. The barn was gone, just a blackened skeleton of beams and charred planks still smoking in the afternoon light. The corral fence had been torn down, posts scattered like matchsticks, and Sam was nowhere in sight. Sam! Jonah was off his horse before it stopped moving, running toward the cabin with his rifle up. Sam! The door hung open on broken hinges. Jonah disappeared inside. Lydia dismounted, legs shaking, and followed. The interior had been ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied, supplies scattered across the floor. But no blood, no body. Lydia clung to that detail like a lifeline. Jonah came out of the back room, face tight. He's not here. Maybe he got away. Maybe. But Jonah didn't sound hopeful. He was already moving outside, studying the ground. Lydia saw what he was looking at. Hoofprints everywhere, too many to count. Boot prints in the mud. Drag marks leading away from the cabin toward where the barn had been. They took him, Jonah said quietly. His voice had gone flat, empty of emotion. That scared Lydia more than anger would have. How do you know? He pointed to a patch of disturbed earth near the corral. Sam wouldn't have gone without a fight. There's shell casings here. He got at least one shot off, but there's no blood trail leading away, which means they took him alive. Why would they do that? Jonah's jaw worked. To draw us out, to make sure we come back. He turned, scanning the horizon. This wasn't random destruction. This was a message. Lydia looked at the burned barn, the destroyed corral, the ransacked cabin. The message was clear enough. Rourke could reach them anywhere, could take anything, could destroy everything they cared about. What do we do? She asked. We find Sam. Jonah was already moving back to his horse. Trail's fresh, maybe 4 or 5 hours old. If we move fast, we can catch up before they get him back to Rourke's ranch. And then what? There were at least 6 horses here, maybe more. Just the 2 of us against... I don't care if there's 20 of them. Jonah swung into the saddle. His face was stone. They took Sam. I'm getting him back. There was no arguing with that tone. Lydia mounted her own horse, exhausted muscles screaming protest, and followed Jonah as he picked up the trail leading south. The tracks were easy to follow. The riders hadn't bothered to hide them. Why would they? They wanted to be followed. Wanted Jonah and Lydia to come charging in, angry and reckless, and easy to kill. They rode hard for 2 hours, following the trail through valleys and across streams. The sun was sinking toward the western peaks when Jonah finally slowed, studying something on the ground. They split up here. He pointed to where the main trail diverged. Most of them went south toward Rourke's ranch, but 2 riders headed east with someone on foot between them. Sam. Has to be. Jonah's eyes followed the eastern trail. They're taking him somewhere else, somewhere isolated. A trap. Probably. He looked at Lydia. You should stay here. Find cover. Wait until I come back. No. Lydia, I said no. You go alone. You're dead. They'll be expecting 1 rider, not 2. That might give us an edge. Or it gets you killed along with me and Sam. That's my choice to make. Lydia's hands were steady on the reins. The fear was still there, would probably always be there now, but she'd gotten used to functioning through it. We've come this far together. I'm not stopping now. Jonah studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say when I say it. And if shooting starts, get clear. I can't worry about protecting you and getting Sam out. I can take care of myself. Can you shoot a man? Not aim near him, not scare him, actually pull the trigger and watch him fall? Lydia thought about Dutch's grin as he'd reached for her at the church. Thought about Rourke's cold eyes. Thought about her father dying of a fever that might not have been a fever at all. Yes, she said. If I have to, I can. They followed the eastern trail as the light failed. Jonah moved slower now, more cautious, watching for ambush points. The land here was rougher, cut through with ravines and rock formations that could hide a dozen men. There. Jonah pointed ahead where smoke rose in a thin line against the darkening sky. Campfire. Maybe half a mile. They left the horses tied in a grove of trees and went forward on foot, The terrain gave them cover, boulders and scrub brush that let them get close without being seen. As they crept nearer, Lydia could make out voices. Men talking, laughing, the smell of cooking meat. Jonah gestured for her to stay low. They crawled the last 100 yards on their bellies, using every bit of cover, until they had a clear view of the camp. 2 men sat by a fire, Dutch and another man Lydia didn't recognize, younger, with a nervous energy that showed in the way he kept standing up and sitting back down. Sam was tied to a tree on the far side of the camp, slumped forward but clearly alive. His face was swollen, one eye nearly shut. They'd beaten him. Lydia felt rage flare hot in her chest. Jonah's hand on her arm stopped her from doing something stupid. "Wait," he breathed. "Let them settle in. They'll get careless." They watched. Dutch pulled out a bottle and took a long drink, then passed it to his companion. The younger man drank too, then laughed at something Dutch said. They were relaxing, confident. Why wouldn't they be? They had Sam, they had the high ground, and anyone coming for him would have to cross open space to get close, except Jonah and Lydia were already close. "When I move, you cover the young one," Jonah whispered. "Don't shoot unless you have to, but if he goes for his gun, put him down." "What about Dutch?" "Dutch is mine." Jonah's voice had gone cold. "On 3, 1, 2. He exploded out of cover before 3, rifle aimed at Dutch's chest. Lydia brought her own rifle up, centering it on the younger man, finger on the trigger. "Don't move!" Jonah's shout froze both men mid-reach for their weapons. "Hands up, nice and slow." Dutch's face went through several expressions at once. Surprise, anger, calculation. The younger man just looked terrified. They both raised their hands. "You're dumber than I thought, Pike," Dutch said. His voice was steady despite the rifle aimed at his heart. "Riding right into a trap. If this is a trap, it's a poor one. Just you two and an old man tied to a tree?" Jonah moved closer, keeping Dutch covered. "Where's the rest of your boys?" "Waiting. You think Rourke didn't plan for this?" "I think you're bluffing." Jonah glanced at Lydia. "Check Sam. Make sure he can move." Lydia edged around the fire, keeping her rifle on the younger man. He tracked her with his eyes, but didn't move. Up close, she could see he was barely 20, all lanky limbs and bad decisions. His hands shook where he held them up. "I didn't want to hurt the old man," he blurted. "Dutch said we were just supposed to bring him in for questioning. That's all. I didn't sign up for—" "Shut up, Tommy," Dutch snapped. Lydia reached Sam. He lifted his head, squinting at her through his good eye. "Took you long enough," he rasped. "Can you walk?" "Can I walk?" "Girl, I was walking before your daddy was born. Just cut me loose and stand back." She sawed through the ropes with her knife. Sam stood slowly, grimacing, one hand pressed to his ribs, definitely bruised, maybe broken. But he was alive. "Tommy, reach into my saddlebag," Dutch said. His tone was conversational, almost friendly. "Real slow. There's a white envelope in there. Take it out." The young man hesitated. Jonah's rifle didn't waver. "Don't. You'll want to see this," Dutch continued. "It's addressed to Miss Hart, from Mr. Rourke. He figured you'd show up here eventually, wanted to make sure you got his message." "I don't want anything from Rourke," Lydia said. "Probably should read it anyway. Might change your mind about things." Jonah's finger tightened on the trigger. For a second, Lydia thought he'd shoot Dutch just to shut him up, but he lowered the rifle slightly and jerked his head at Tommy. "Get the envelope. Touch anything else, you're dead." Tommy moved like he was walking through waist-deep water, every movement exaggerated and careful. He reached into the saddlebag and pulled out a white envelope sealed with red wax. He held it up for Jonah to see. "Bring it here," Jonah said to Lydia. "Keep him covered." Lydia backed toward Jonah, rifle still aimed at Tommy. Jonah took the envelope, broke the seal with his thumb, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. His expression darkened as he read. "What does it say?" Lydia asked. Jonah handed it to her. The handwriting was neat, precise, the words chosen with lawyerly care. "Miss Hart, by now you've discovered the futility of seeking legal redress for your grievances. The deed you sought no longer exists in any official capacity, and the witnesses who might corroborate your claims have either left the territory or reconsidered their willingness to testify. I am not a cruel man, but neither am I a patient one. You have caused me considerable embarrassment and expense, However, I am prepared to offer you one final opportunity to resolve this matter amicably. Present yourself at my ranch by noon tomorrow, and we will discuss terms. Bring Mr. Pike if you wish. I bear him no ill will, despite his interference. We are all reasonable people and can surely reach an understanding. Fail to appear, and I will be forced to pursue other remedies. Your property in Copperfield has already been seized for unpaid debts. Mr. Reeves' well-being depends entirely on your cooperation, and Mr. Pike's homestead, while currently intact, could suffer the same fate as his barn if circumstances require it. The choice is yours. Respectfully, Calvin Rourke. Lydia read it twice, rage building with each word. The arrogance, the barely veiled threats, the assumption that she'd just come crawling back because he'd applied enough pressure. He seized my property, she said, voice shaking. He can't do that. I've been gone less than a week. He can do anything if the sheriff's in his pocket, Sam said. He'd made his way closer, moving like every step hurt. Probably had papers drawn up before you even left town, just waiting for an excuse. So that's it? I lose everything either way? Go to him or don't. He takes what he wants? That's how men like Rourke operate, Dutch said. He'd lowered his hand slightly, sensing the shift in attention. They don't lose, ever. Your daddy found that out the hard way. Seems you're a slow learner. Jonah hit him. It was fast, efficient, rifle stock to Dutch's jaw. The big man went down hard, blood streaming from his mouth. Jonah stood over him, breathing hard. Talk about her father again, Jonah said quietly. See what happens. Dutch spat blood and a tooth into the dirt. But he was grinning, even with his mouth wrecked. Touched a nerve, did I? That's good. That's real good. Means you'll make mistakes. Tommy. Jonah turned to the younger man. You're going to take your friend here and ride back to Rourke. Tell him Miss Hart received his message. Tell him she'll see him in hell before she sets foot on his ranch. Tommy swallowed hard. He'll kill me for letting you go. Maybe, but I'll definitely kill you if you don't start moving in the next 10 seconds. The young man helped Dutch to his feet. The bigger man swayed, still grinning through broken teeth. This ain't over, Pike. Not even close. Seems to be your favorite phrase. Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting you leave vertical. They stumbled to their horses, Dutch leaning heavily on Tommy. Within minutes, they were gone, disappearing into the darkness with the sound of hoofbeats fading south. Sam lowered himself carefully onto a log near the fire. That was stupid, letting them go. Would have been stupider to kill them, Jonah said. That crosses a line we can't come back from. Rourke already crossed that line when he burned your barn and beat an old man half to death. Maybe, but we're not him. Lydia was still staring at the letter, the words blurred and refocused. Your property has been seized. Mr. Reeves' well-being depends on your cooperation. Everything she'd run from, everything she'd fought to keep, gone. Just like that. What do we do? The question came out smaller than she intended. Jonah took the letter from her hands and fed it to the fire. They watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash. We do what we should have done from the start. We stop playing Rourke's game and make him play ours. How? We go to the one place he doesn't control, the one authority that might actually listen. The territorial office didn't help. Not the territorial office, the federal marshal. Jonah met her eyes. There's a circuit judge coming through Deer Lodge in 3 days. Federal appointment, answers to Washington, not to local interests. If we can get to him, present our case. We don't have a case, Lydia interrupted. The deed's gone. We have no proof of anything. We have you. We have Sam. We have witnesses who saw Rourke seize your property illegally. And we have Henry Watts, who can testify that the deed existed and was removed. Jonah's voice picked up intensity. It's not much, but it's something. More than Rourke thinks we have. Deer Lodge is 4 days' ride from here, Sam said. He was pressing a hand to his ribs, face gray with pain. And I'm in no shape to travel that fast. Probably got a cracked rib, maybe 2. Then Lydia and I go alone. That's a death sentence. Rourke will have men on every road between here and there. So we don't take the roads. Jonah was already thinking ahead, planning. Lydia could see it in his eyes. We go through the mountains, the high passes. It'll add time, but it's terrain his men don't know. You know it? Well enough. I worked a trap line through there 5 winters ago. It'll be rough, but we can make it. Sam shook his head slowly. You're both going to get yourselves killed. You have a better idea? The old man was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the darkness, their horses shifted and blew. Finally, Sam sighed. No, I don't, which is why this is going to work, or we're all dead anyway. He looked at Lydia. You sure about this, girl? Once you go to the law, once you make this official, there's no backing down. Rourke will come at you with everything. He's already coming at me with everything, Lydia said. At least this way I'm fighting back. All right then. Sam struggled to his feet. Let's get moving. We'll head back to the cabin, grab what supplies are left, and you two can light out for Deer Lodge at first light. I'll hole up somewhere Rourke's men won't think to look. Got a friend with a place up near the Canadian border. Figure I'll visit him for a few weeks. They made it back to the cabin by midnight. The burned barn looked worse in the moonlight, skeletal and accusing. They picked through the wreckage of the cabin, salvaging what they could. Most of the food stores were ruined, but Jonah found ammunition that had been overlooked and a spare rifle that had fallen behind an overturned cabinet. Sam packed a small bag, moving slow and careful. Lydia watched him, this old man who'd been dragged into her fight and beaten for it, and felt guilt twist in her stomach. I'm sorry, she said quietly, about all of this. You didn't ask for any of it. Sam looked up from his packing. Nobody asks for the fights that matter. They just show up, and you either stand or you don't. I'm standing. Been doing it my whole life, not about to stop now. Still, if something happens to you because of me, then something happens. We all die eventually, girl. Might as well die for something that counts. He cinched his bag closed. Now stop apologizing and get yourself ready. You've got a long ride ahead. They left before dawn, 3 riders heading in different directions. Sam north toward the border, Jonah and Lydia east into the mountains. No goodbyes, no dramatic speeches, just nods and a shared understanding that they might not see each other again. The mountain trail was exactly as brutal as Jonah had promised. Steep switchbacks, loose scree that threatened to send the horses tumbling, passes so narrow they had to dismount and lead the animals through single file. The air got thinner as they climbed, cold enough that Lydia could see her breath even in afternoon sunlight. They didn't talk much. Talking required breath they needed for climbing. But that night, camped in a hollow beneath a rock overhang, Jonah finally broke the silence. Tell me about your father, what you remember. Lydia was surprised by the question. Why? Because you're fighting for his legacy. Seems like you should remember why it matters. She thought about it, trying to pull memories from 15 years ago. He was patient, I remember that. He'd explain things over and over until I understood how to read the sky for weather, how to tell good soil from bad, when to plant and when to harvest. He never got frustrated when I asked stupid questions. That's not stupid, that's how you learn. I remember his hands. Lydia stared at her own hands, scarred and calloused now. They were always dirty, work hands, but gentle when he'd braid my hair or bandage a scraped knee. Her throat tightened. After he died, I tried to keep the property going the way he would have wanted, but I was 12. I didn't know enough, didn't have the strength for the heavy work. And people in town, they weren't cruel exactly, but they weren't helpful either, like they were waiting to see how long it took me to fail. But you didn't fail. You held on for over a decade. Barely. I was weeks away from losing everything when Rourke made his offer. Part of me was almost relieved. Finally, someone was going to take the burden away. Lydia laughed bitterly. Took me standing in the mud in a wedding dress to realize that some burdens are worth carrying. Jonah was quiet for a moment, then, my father lost our homestead when I was 16. Different circumstances, but same result. One day we had a place, the next we were drifters. He never recovered from it, drank himself to death inside 2 years. My mother followed a year after that, just gave up, I think. Broken heart, the doctor said, but I knew better. She'd lost her home, lost her husband, and couldn't see the point in continuing. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something important. That land, property, wealth, none of it means anything if you let it own you instead of the other way around. Your father understood that. He wasn't trying to build an empire. He just wanted to leave you something solid to stand on. And Rourke wants to take it because he can't stand the idea of anyone having something he doesn't control. That's about the size of it. Jonah threw another stick on their small fire. But here's what Rourke doesn't understand.
He thinks power is about what you own, who you control, how much fear you can generate. But real power is knowing what you're willing to lose and what you'll die to protect. You've already lost your property.
You've got nothing left but your life and your principles. That makes you dangerous in ways Rourke can't comprehend. Lydia thought about that. 2 weeks ago, she would have said her life and her land were the same thing. Now the land was gone, and she was still here, still fighting, still breathing. "When we get to Deer Lodge," she said slowly, "when we stand in front of that judge, what exactly are we asking for? Justice, the return of your property, an investigation into your father's death and Rourke's business practices. Criminal charges if we can get them." That's a lot to ask with no evidence. "We'll have testimony. Henry's, if we can get him to Deer Lodge, Sam's, mine, yours. And we'll have the fact that Rourke seized your property the second you refused to marry him. That's not normal procedure, even with debts. A federal judge will see that. And if he doesn't?" Jonah met her eyes across the fire. "Then we've tried the legal way and it didn't work. And we move on to less legal options." "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but I've spent 15 years watching men like Rourke operate. They only respect two things, superior force or public exposure. We can't match his force, but we might be able to expose him in ways that matter, make him toxic to other business interests. Drive away his political support, turn him from an asset into a liability for the people who protect him. That could take years." "Probably. You prepared for that?" Lydia looked at her hands again. Work-scarred, weapon-calloused, nothing like the soft hands of the girl she'd been 2 weeks ago. "I don't know what I'm prepared for anymore. Every time I think I've hit bottom, there's another level down. But I know I can't go back. Can't be that woman who'd marry a man she despised just to survive. So I guess I'm prepared for whatever comes. Because the alternative is worse than death." "That's the right answer," Jonah smiled slightly. "Even if it's a terrifying one." They reached Deer Lodge on the evening of the third day, half frozen and exhausted. The town was bigger than Copperfield but smaller than Helena, built around mining operations that gave everything a perpetual coating of dust. The federal courthouse sat at the center of town, a 2-story brick building that radiated authority. Jonah got them a room at a boarding house run by a widow who asked no questions. Lydia collapsed on the bed and didn't move for an hour. When she finally dragged herself downstairs, Jonah was at a table with a man she didn't recognize. Older, maybe 60, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen everything twice. He wore a suit that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. "Lydia, this is Marcus Chen," Jonah said. "He's a lawyer, one of the few in the territory who doesn't owe Rourke favors." Chen stood and offered his hand. His grip was firm, professional. "Miss Hart, Jonah's been explaining your situation. It's complicated." "That's one word for it." Lydia sat down. "Can you help us?" "I can try, but I'll be honest with you, this is going to be difficult. You're asking a federal judge to overturn property seizure without documentation showing the seizure was illegal. Everything Rourke did was probably technically legal, even if it was morally bankrupt. The marriage contract was void. I never said my vows." "True. But the debt you owe is real, isn't it? The taxes, the loans." Lydia's stomach sank. "Yes, but I was making payments. I had arrangements, which Rourke called in. That's legal. Unethical, but legal." Chen pulled out a notebook and pencil. "However, the speed of the seizure raises questions. Due process typically requires notices, hearings, opportunities to contest. If Rourke skipped those steps, we have grounds. But we'll need to prove it." "How?" "Testimony, documents, anything showing he moved faster than the law allows." Chen tapped his pencil against the notebook. "The mineral rights claim is more interesting. If we can establish that your father documented valuable mineral deposits and that documentation was deliberately destroyed to facilitate theft, that's a federal crime. Fraud, conspiracy. Maybe even murder if we can connect it to your father's death." "Big if," Jonah said. "Very big, but not impossible." Chen looked at Lydia. "The judge arrives tomorrow. I can get you on the docket for the day after. That gives us 48 hours to build a case. I'll need you to write down everything you remember. Dates, conversations, witnesses. Jonah, I'll need the same from you, and we need to find this Henry Watts and get him here." I'll send word tonight, Jonah said. Don't know if he'll come. It's a risk for him. Everything about this is a risk, but it's the only play we have. Chen stood. Get me that testimony by tomorrow morning. We'll meet again at noon to prepare for the hearing. He left. Lydia and Jonah sat in silence for a moment. Think it'll work? Lydia asked. No idea, but it's better than nothing. Jonah rubbed his eyes. Come on, let's get some food and sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long. They were halfway through a meal of questionable stew when the door to the boarding house slammed open. A young man stood in the doorway, out of breath, eyes wide. There's riders coming, he gasped. 15, maybe 20, asking about a woman and a man traveling together. They're searching every building in town. Lydia's blood went cold. Rourke. Probably his men. Jonah was already standing, dropping coins on the table. Back door? Through the kitchen, the widow said. She didn't ask questions, just pointed. They ran. Out the back door into an alley, cutting through yards and side streets as shouts erupted behind them. Lydia's legs were screaming, her lungs burning, but she didn't slow down. Jonah pulled her into a narrow space between buildings. They pressed against the wall, breathing hard as footsteps pounded past, men shouting orders, doors being kicked in. They're searching systematically, Jonah whispered. We can't stay here. The courthouse? Too obvious, and they'll have it covered. He thought fast. The mining office, 3 blocks east. It'll be empty this time of night, and it's got a basement where they store equipment. We can hide there until they move on. They moved through shadows, staying off main streets, using every scrap of cover. Twice they had to freeze as riders passed. Once they were nearly spotted by a man checking alleys, but he was drunk and sloppy, and they slipped past while he was cursing at shadows. The mining office was locked, but Jonah made short work of the door with his knife. They slipped inside, found the basement stairs, and descended into darkness that smelled of oil and metal. Above them, the search continued, boots on wooden sidewalks, voices demanding cooperation. Lydia sat on a crate, shaking. They found us. How did they find us? Same way they found us in Helena. Rourke has people everywhere. Someone saw us ride in, sent word. Jonah was at the small basement window watching the street. Question is, what do we do now? We can't get to the courthouse without being spotted. Can't leave town without riding through a gauntlet. So we're trapped. For tonight. But they can't search forever. Eventually they'll have to pull back, regroup. That's when we move. Move where? To the hearing? Jonah, if Rourke knows we're here, if he knows what we're planning, then we do it anyway. We show up at that courthouse with every witness we can muster, and we make our case in front of a federal judge in a public courtroom. Let Rourke try to stop us with 50 witnesses watching. Lydia wanted to believe it would be that simple, but she'd learned enough about Rourke to know he didn't let obstacles stop him. He found ways around them, over them, through them. They waited in the darkness while the search went on above. Hours passed, the voices faded. Eventually, silence. Think they're gone? Lydia whispered. Some of them. But they'll have men watching the roads, the courthouse, anywhere they think will show up. Jonah turned from the window. We need help, someone local who can move around without drawing attention. Like who? Like Marcus Chen, he's not a suspect. He can get to the courthouse, file our testimony, make sure the judge knows we're trying to appear, even if we can't get there safely. And then what? Then we force Rourke's hand. Make him come after us in a place where he can't hide what he's doing. Jonah's smile was grim in the darkness. We're done running. Time to stand and fight. Outside in the Montana night, Rourke's men were regrouping, planning, preparing for whatever came next. And somewhere in the darkness, 2 people with nothing left to lose were doing the same. Dawn came too fast and too slow at the same time. Lydia had dozed fitfully on the crate, jerking awake at every sound, until exhaustion finally dragged her under for maybe an hour. When she opened her eyes, gray light was filtering through the basement window, and Jonah was gone. She sat up, heart hammering, and saw a piece of paper wedged under a wrench on the workbench. His handwriting was cramped but legible. Gone to find Chen. Stay hidden. Back before noon. J. Lydia crumpled the note and shoved it in her pocket. The basement was cold, her body stiff from sleeping on wood. She stood and stretched, wincing at the protest from muscles that had been pushed past their limits days ago. Through the small window, she could see boots passing on the sidewalk above. Rourke's men were still out there, still searching. She had nothing to do but wait. So she waited, pacing the small space, counting the tools hanging on the walls, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. 2 hours passed. 3. The morning stretched out like a sentence with no end. Finally, footsteps on the stairs. Lydia grabbed a wrench, held it ready, then relaxed when she saw Jonah's face appear in the dim light. "Chen's on board," he said without preamble. "He's filing our testimony this morning. Judge arrives at noon. First session starts at 2. Can we get there?" That's the complicated part. Jonah sat on a crate looking tired. Rourke's got men watching every approach to the courthouse. Front door, back door, side streets. We try to walk in. We'll be stopped before we reach the steps. So what do? We don't walk in. We make them bring us in. Jonah pulled out a piece of paper, a notice printed that morning. Chen got the judge to issue a federal summons. Requires us to appear under penalty of contempt. More importantly, it requires the local sheriff to ensure our safe passage to the courthouse. Lydia stared at the paper. The sheriff works for Rourke, which is why this is perfect. The sheriff has to choose, follow a federal order, or openly defy a circuit judge. Either way, we win. He brings us in safe, we get our hearing. He refuses. The judge knows Rourke's corrupted local law enforcement. Unless the sheriff just ignores the summons and claims he couldn't find us. He could, except Chen made sure the summons was served publicly, with witnesses. Half the town knows about it by now. The sheriff can't pretend it didn't happen. Jonah's smile was sharp. We've backed him into a corner. Now we see if he's smart enough to take the out we're giving him. They waited another hour. Lydia's nerves were wound so tight she thought she might snap. Then, finally, heavy footsteps on the stairs. Multiple people. Jonah stood, hand on his revolver. The sheriff appeared first, a heavy-set man with a face like worn leather and eyes that gave nothing away. Behind him were 2 deputies, both looking uncomfortable. "Miss Hart, Mr. Pike." The sheriff's voice was flat, professional. "I have a summons requiring your appearance before Circuit Judge Nathaniel Morrison at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I'm here to ensure your safe transport to the courthouse." "We'd be happy to comply, Sheriff," Jonah said. His hand stayed on his gun. "Long as you can guarantee that safety extends all the way to the courtroom. You have my word." "Your words had some flexibility in the past." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I don't like what you're implying, Pike." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You work for Rourke. Everyone knows it. So forgive me if I need a little more than your word before I walk out of here." One of the deputies shifted his weight. The sheriff held up a hand, stopping whatever the man had been about to say. "You're right. I've done favors for Mr. Rourke over the years. Business relationships, nothing illegal. But this?" He tapped the summons. "This is a federal order. I don't compromise my position for anyone, not even Rourke. You have safe passage, on my badge." Jonah studied him for a long moment. Then he took his hand off his gun. "All right, let's go." They climbed out of the basement into morning sunlight that felt harsh after hours in the dark. A small crowd had gathered outside. Curious townspeople, a few journalists with notebooks, and scattered throughout, Rourke's men. Lydia spotted Dutch leaning against a post across the street, his jaw still swollen from where Jonah had hit him. He stared at her with flat, promising eyes. The sheriff and his deputies formed a loose triangle around Lydia and Jonah as they walked toward the courthouse. The crowd parted. Rourke's men watched, but didn't move. The message was clear. Touch these 2, and you're interfering with a federal proceeding. Even Rourke's reach had limits. The courthouse was more impressive inside than out. High ceilings, polished wood, the smell of old books and older power. A clerk directed them to a courtroom on the 2nd floor. The gallery was already filling with spectators, some curious, some clearly aligned with Rourke, others harder to read. Marcus Chen met them at the door. "You made it. Good. We have 30 minutes before the judge arrives. Let me walk you through what's going to happen." They sat at a table in the front of the courtroom while Chen explained procedure. The judge would hear opening statements, review submitted testimony, allow questions from both sides. It wasn't a full trial, more like a preliminary hearing to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed with formal charges. The key is establishing a pattern, Chen said. Rourke's seizure of your property, the missing mineral rights documentation, your father's suspicious death. Individually, each could be explained away. Together, they form a picture of systematic corruption. What if the judge doesn't see it that way? Lydia asked. Then we lose, and you'll need to decide what comes next. The courtroom doors opened. Calvin Rourke walked in. He looked exactly as Lydia remembered, barrel-chested, iron-haired, radiating the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting his way. He wore a fine suit, carried himself like he owned the building. Behind him came 3 lawyers, each carrying thick briefcases. Rourke's eyes found Lydia. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice carrying across the courtroom, "I'm glad you came to your senses. Much more civilized to settle this through proper channels." "I didn't come to settle anything," Lydia said. Her voice shook slightly, but she kept her chin up. "I came to see you held accountable." Admirable sentiment. Misguided, but admirable. Rourke took his seat at the opposing table. "This won't take long. My attorneys have documentation for every action I've taken regarding your property. All perfectly legal, I assure you." "Legal and right aren't always the same thing. In a courtroom, they're the only thing that matters." The bailiff's voice cut through the tension. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Nathaniel Morrison presiding." Everyone stood as the judge entered. Morrison was older than Lydia expected, mid-70s maybe, with white hair and a face carved by time into something stern and unreadable. He took his seat, arranged papers on his bench, and surveyed the room with eyes that missed nothing. "Be seated." His voice was surprisingly strong for a man his age. "This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Hart versus Rourke, concerning alleged illegal seizure of property and related claims. Mr. Chen, you represent the plaintiff?" Chen stood. "I do, Your Honor." "And Mr. Rourke is represented by—" "Lawrence Blackwell, Your Honor." One of Rourke's lawyers stood, tall, silver-haired, expensive. "Along with my associates, Mr. Porter and Mr. Vine." 3 attorneys for a preliminary hearing. Someone's taking this seriously. Morrison's tone was dry. "Mr. Chen, you may proceed with your opening statement." Chen stood and laid out their case. He spoke clearly, methodically, building the narrative piece by piece. Lydia's forced engagement to Rourke, her decision to leave, the immediate seizure of her property, the missing mineral rights documentation. Thomas Hart's death 15 years ago under suspicious circumstances. He didn't sensationalize, didn't exaggerate, just facts, dates, sequences of events that suggested a pattern. When he finished, Morrison turned to Blackwell. "Your response?" Blackwell stood with the kind of practiced ease that came from decades in courtrooms. "Your Honor, what we have here is a tragic case of a young woman who made a series of poor financial decisions and is now seeking to blame someone else for the consequences. Miss Hart inherited property from her father along with significant debts. She struggled to maintain that property for years. When Mr. Rourke generously offered marriage as a solution that would have provided her with security and stability, she accepted, then changed her mind at the last moment. A breach of contract, Your Honor, not a crime on Mr. Rourke's part, but on hers." "I never said my vows," Lydia said. Chen put a hand on her arm, warning her to stay quiet. Morrison looked at her. "You'll have an opportunity to testify, Miss Hart. For now, let the attorneys speak." He turned back to Blackwell. "Continue." "The debts Miss Hart accumulated were real and substantial. Tax liens, unpaid loans, merchant credit. When she breached this marriage contract, those creditors, rightfully concerned they'd never be repaid, called in their obligations. Mr. Rourke, as the largest creditor, had every legal right to seize the property in satisfaction of those debts." "How convenient that all the creditors called in their debts on the same day," Chen said. "Objection. Counsel is editorializing." "Sustained. Mr. Chen, save your commentary for your witnesses." Blackwell continued. "As for these allegations about mineral rights and suspicious deaths, Your Honor, these are conspiracy theories built on hearsay and speculation. Thomas Hart died of fever 15 years ago. The attending physician documented the cause of death. No foul play was suspected then or since. And as for mineral rights, there is no documentation in the official record. If such rights existed, where's the proof? That's exactly the question, Chen said. Where's the proof? Why would documentation filed with the territorial office simply disappear? Perhaps because it never existed in the first place. The judge held up a hand. Gentlemen, I've heard enough preamble. Let's move to testimony. Mr. Chen, call your first witness. I call Lydia Hart. Lydia stood on shaking legs and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in. She sat, hands folded in her lap to hide the trembling, and looked out at the courtroom. Every seat was full now, people standing in the back, reporters scribbling notes, and in the front row, Calvin Rourke, watching her with those cold eyes. Chen approached. Miss Hart, please describe the circumstances that led to your engagement to Calvin Rourke. Lydia took a breath. I was desperate. I'd been struggling to keep my father's property for years. The debts were mounting, and I couldn't find work that paid enough to cover them. Mr. Rourke came to my house with a contract already drawn up. He said if I married him, my financial problems would disappear. Did you want to marry him? No, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. Why did you change your mind? Because Lydia looked at Rourke. He was smiling slightly, like this was all very entertaining. Because on my wedding day, I realized that surviving isn't the same as living. And marrying a man I didn't love who didn't love me, who only wanted my land, that would have been surviving, not living. What happened when you refused to complete the ceremony? Mr. Rourke threatened me, said I'd lose everything, and within a week he'd made good on that threat. My property was seized. I had nothing. Chen nodded. Let's talk about your father. How did he die? Fever. That's what they told me. He got sick very suddenly and died within 3 days. Did you ever question that explanation? Blackwell stood. Objection. Calls for speculation. Your Honor, I'm asking about the witness's state of mind, Chen said. Overruled. Answer the question, Miss Hart. Lydia's hands tightened. I was 12. I didn't question anything. But looking back now, knowing what I know about Mr. Rourke's methods, yes, I question it. What do you know about mineral rights on your father's property? I didn't know anything until recently, but I've been told my father discovered valuable minerals and filed documentation with the territorial office. Documentation that's now missing. Who told you this? Jonah Pike. He worked for my father briefly. He saw the evidence firsthand. Chen returned to his seat. Blackwell stood, buttoning his jacket as he approached the witness stand. Miss Hart, you admit you have no direct knowledge of these alleged mineral rights? I was 12 when my father died. Yes or no, please. Lydia's jaw tightened. No, not direct knowledge. And the fever that killed your father, you admit it was diagnosed by a physician? Yes. A physician who had no connection to Calvin Rourke? I don't know. You don't know, but you're implying murder based on nothing but your feelings and the word of a man who worked for your father for what? A summer? 2 months? Objection, Chen said, badgering. Sustained. Mr. Blackwell, tone it down. Blackwell smiled. Of course, Your Honor. Miss Hart, let's talk about the debts you accumulated. Were they real? Yes. Did you sign loan documents? Receive the money? Yes. Did you make your payments on time? Lydia hesitated. Not always. Sometimes I was late, but I always paid eventually. Late payments violate the terms of most loan agreements, correct? I suppose. So when your creditors called in those debts, they were within their legal rights? Technically, but thank you. No further questions. Lydia returned to her seat feeling like she'd been filleted. Chen patted her hand. You did fine. Blackwell's job is to make you doubt yourself. Don't let him. I call Jonah Pike, Chen announced. Jonah took the stand, looking uncomfortable in the formal setting. His testimony was more direct than Lydia's. He described working for Thomas Hart, seeing the copper-streaked rock, noticing Hart's secretive surveys. He talked about the timing of Rourke's offer and Hart's death. He laid out the connections in a way that sounded damning. Blackwell came at him harder. Mr. Pike, you have a history with Calvin Rourke, don't you? I know him. Isn't it true that your family lost their homestead 15 years ago, and you blame Mr. Rourke for that loss? Jonah's expression went cold. My family lost everything. I don't know who was directly responsible, but you suspect Mr.
Rourke, don't you? This isn't about justice for Miss Hart. This is about your personal vendetta.
I helped Miss Hart because what Rourke did to her was wrong, same as what was done to my family. Whether it's connected or not doesn't change that. So you're using this young woman's tragedy to pursue your own agenda? I'm helping her pursue justice. If that bothers Rourke, he should have thought about that before he tried to steal her land. Objection, Blackwell's voice rose. The witness is making unfounded accusations, which is exactly what this entire proceeding is based on, Morrison interrupted. Unfounded accusations dressed up as testimony. Mr. Chen, do you have anything beyond speculation and circumstantial evidence? Chen stood. Your Honor, I'd like to call Henry Watts. A murmur went through the courtroom. The doors in the back opened and Henry shuffled in, looking small and old and terrified. He took the stand with shaking hands. Mr.
Watts, Chen said gently. You work at the territorial office in Helena? Yes, sir. 5 years now. Do you remember processing mineral rights documentation for Thomas Hart? I do. Clear as day. Year was 1859. Mr. Hart came in himself, had all the paperwork in order, filed it proper. And where's that documentation now? Gone. I checked the files myself when Mr. Pike asked me to. Should have been there, wasn't. Could it have been misfiled? No, sir. I know my filing system.
That record was removed, deliberately.
Blackwell was on his feet.
Objection. The witness is speculating about intent. The witness is testifying about his professional observation, Chen countered. Overruled, Morrison said. But Mr. Watts, can you prove the documentation was removed deliberately versus simply lost? Henry's shoulders slumped. No, Your Honor, I can't prove it. I just know what I filed, and I know it's not there now. Blackwell's cross-examination was brutal. He tore into Henry's memory, his age, the possibility of confusion. By the time he was done, Henry looked near tears. The hearing stretched into late afternoon. More witnesses, more cross-examination, more legal maneuvering. Lydia watched it all with growing despair. They had testimony, but no proof. Suspicions, but no evidence. Everything Chen said was true, but truth without documentation was just another word for opinion. Finally, Morrison called a halt. I've heard enough. I'll review the submitted materials and issue a ruling by tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down like a gunshot. People filed out. Lydia sat frozen at the table, unable to move. Chen gathered his papers, not meeting her eyes. What does this mean? She asked. It means we wait. The judge will decide if there's enough to proceed with formal charges or if this case is dismissed. And if it's dismissed, then Rourke keeps everything. And you're out of legal options. Across the courtroom, Rourke stood and straightened his jacket. He walked over to their table, his lawyers trailing behind like remoras. Miss Hart, he said pleasantly, that was quite a performance. I almost believed you yourself. It's not a performance, it's the truth. Truth is subjective, my dear. Justice, however, is objective. And objectively, you have no case. He leaned closer, voice dropping so only their table could hear. You should have taken my offer when you had the chance. Now you have nothing. No property, no prospects, no future. All because you couldn't swallow your pride and accept the life I was offering. I'd rather have nothing than have it at your price. Rourke's smile vanished. For a moment, Lydia saw something beneath the polished surface. Rage carefully controlled, but absolutely real. We'll see how long that pride sustains you when you're starving in a ditch somewhere. Give it a year. 2, maybe. Then you'll understand what I tried to save you from. He walked away. His lawyers followed. The courtroom emptied until it was just Lydia, Jonah, and Chen. What do we do now? Lydia asked. We wait for the ruling, Chen said, and we hope the judge sees what we see. And if he doesn't? Chen finally met her eyes. Then you do what people do when the law fails them. You survive, and you find another way to fight. They left through the back entrance to avoid the crowd. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Jonah walked close beside Lydia, scanning the street for threats. I think we lost, Lydia said quietly. We don't know that yet. Yes, we do. You saw Morrison's face. He thinks we're wasting his time with conspiracy theories. Maybe, but sometimes judges surprise you. They were halfway back to the boarding house when Lydia stopped walking. Jonah turned, questioning. I'm not waiting for the ruling, she said. What? I'm not waiting. If we lose tomorrow, Rourke wins everything. But even if we win, even if Morrison orders an investigation, that could take months, years. And the whole time Rourke will be working to undermine it, to pay off witnesses, to make evidence disappear. Lydia's voice grew stronger. I'm done being reactive, done waiting for someone else to save me. What are you saying? I'm saying I want my property back. Not through the courts, not through judges and lawyers and proper channels. I want to walk onto that land and take it back. Force Rourke to either accept it or escalate this into something public and violent that he can't control. Jonah stared at her. That's insane. Rourke has armed men. You'd be trespassing on property he legally owns. He could shoot you and claim self-defense. Only if people aren't watching. Only if there aren't witnesses. Lydia's mind was racing now, pieces clicking together. What if we make it public? What if we invite the whole town to watch me reclaim my land? Reporters, officials, everyone. Let Rourke try to shoot me in front of 50 witnesses and a federal judge who's still in town. He won't shoot you himself. He'll have his men do it. Then we bring our own people. You, Sam, anyone else who'll stand with us. Lydia grabbed Jonah's arm. Don't you see? We've been fighting this Rourke's way, through intimidation and legal maneuvering, but there's another way. We make this so public, so visible, that he can't make it disappear. We force him to either back down or show everyone exactly what kind of man he is. Jonah was quiet for a long time. Then slowly, he smiled. You know what? That's crazy enough, it might actually work. They spent the evening planning. Chen was horrified when they told him, tried to talk them out of it, finally gave up and agreed to help. If you're going to commit professional suicide, at least let me make sure it's documented properly. By midnight, they had the outline of a plan. By dawn, they'd refined it into something that might, maybe, work. And as the sun rose on the day the judge would announce his ruling, Lydia Hart was already riding toward the land her father had died protecting, ready to take back what was hers or die trying. The house looked smaller than Lydia remembered. Or maybe she'd just grown used to seeing everything through the lens of loss. It sat on a gentle rise, weathered clapboard that needed paint, windows that caught the morning light and threw it back in broken fragments. Her father had built this place with his own hands. Now it belonged to Calvin Rourke, at least on paper. Lydia sat on her horse at the property line, Jonah beside her, and studied the land that should have been hers, 40 acres of Montana earth. In the distance, she could see where her father had cleared fields, where he'd planned to plant crops that never got planted. The house was empty. Rourke hadn't bothered to put anyone in it yet. Why would he? He'd gotten what he wanted, the land itself, and whatever was buried beneath it. You ready for this? Jonah asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Behind them, more riders were approaching. Chen had done his job well. 3 reporters from different papers, notebooks ready, a territorial surveyor who owed Chen a favor, 2 merchants from Deer Lodge who'd been willing to serve as witnesses once Chen explained what was happening, and Sam, looking worse for wear but refusing to stay behind, his rifle across his saddle and his jaw set in a way that said arguing would be pointless. Quite a gathering, Sam observed as he pulled up beside them. Rourke's going to be furious. That's the idea, Lydia said. Let him be furious in front of witnesses who'll write about it in every paper between here and Washington. One of the reporters, a young man with ink-stained fingers and eager eyes, rode forward. Miss Hart? Thomas Brennan, Deer Lodge Examiner. Can you explain what we're doing here? I'm reclaiming my property, Mr. Brennan, the property that was seized illegally while I was away. I'm going to walk onto that land, enter that house, and establish residence. If Mr. Rourke has an objection, he can take it up with the courts. Didn't you just have a hearing about this yesterday? The judge hasn't ruled yet, but I'm not waiting for permission to take back what's mine, Brennan scribbled rapidly. And you expect Rourke to just let you do this? I expect Rourke to show his true nature. Whether that's backing down or escalating to violence in front of all of you, well, we'll see. Another reporter pushed forward. What if he has you arrested for trespassing? Then we'll see how quickly a federal judge rules on a legal seizure when there's a woman in jail for trying to reclaim her inheritance. Lydia nudged her horse forward. The others followed, a ragged procession crossing the property line. She half expected gunfire, men bursting from cover, some dramatic confrontation. But the land was quiet, empty, just wind in the grass and the creak of saddle leather. They reached the house. Lydia dismounted, her legs shaking but holding. She walked up the 3 steps to the porch, steps her father had built. She could see his careful work in the joints, and tried the door, locked. She'd expected that. "Mr. Pike, would you mind?" Jonah stepped up, examined the lock, then put his shoulder to the door. It gave on the second hit, wood splintering around the old lock. The door swung open on rusty hinges. The interior smelled of dust and abandonment. Lydia stepped inside, and memories hit her like a physical force. The main room where her father used to sit by the fire, reading to her from books they couldn't afford. The kitchen where she'd learned to cook, burning more meals than she'd successfully made. The hallway leading to bedrooms she hadn't seen in over a week, but felt like years. Someone had been through the place. Drawers hung open, furniture was shifted. Rourke's men, probably, looking for anything valuable or incriminating. They hadn't found what they were looking for. Lydia could tell by the haphazard nature of the search. If they'd found the mineral surveys, if such things even still existed, they would have been more thorough in their destruction. "Get pictures of everything," she told the reporters. "Document that I'm here, that I'm taking possession. Date and time, stamp it." They spread out through the house, notebooks and cameras working. The surveyor was already outside, checking property markers against official maps. Sam took up a position on the porch, rifle visible, watching the road. Jonah found Lydia in her old bedroom. It was exactly as she'd left it. Narrow bed, simple dresser, a chair by the window where she used to sit and watch storms roll across the plains. Some of her clothes were still in the dresser, a hairbrush on the washstand, small pieces of a life interrupted. "You all right?" Jonah asked. "I don't know. I thought coming back here would feel like victory. Instead, it just feels sad." "It's both. That's allowed." A shout from outside brought them running. Sam was standing at the porch rail pointing south. Riders, a lot of them. Lydia's stomach dropped. She counted the approaching horses. 8, 10, more appearing over the ridge. Rourke wasn't taking chances. He was bringing an army. "Everyone outside," Jonah ordered. "Form a line in front of the house, reporters in the middle. Make sure your cameras are ready." They assembled on the porch and in the yard, a thin line of witnesses and the 2 people they'd come to support. The riders approached at a steady pace, not rushing, confident in their numbers. Dutch was in the lead, his jaw still swollen but his eyes cold and focused. Behind him rode men Lydia didn't recognize, ranch hands, hired guns, the kind of men who'd do anything for the right price. And in the middle of them all, Calvin Rourke sat his horse like a man surveying property he owned. They stopped 20 yards from the house. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Rourke dismounted with deliberate calm and walked forward, his men spreading out behind him in a loose semicircle. "Miss Hart," he said pleasantly, "you're trespassing." "I'm reclaiming my property, Mr. Rourke. There's a difference." The law would disagree. This property was legally seized for unpaid debts. It belongs to me now. The seizure was illegal. I was never given proper notice or a chance to contest the debts. That makes your claim void. Rourke smiled. "I have documentation that says otherwise. I have witnesses who say you're a liar and a thief." The smile vanished. "You want to do this here? Now? In front of reporters and God knows who else?" "That's exactly what I want. I want everyone to see what kind of man you are, how you stole my father's land, how you tried to force me into marriage to legitimize that theft, how you've corrupted every institution that should have protected me." Bold accusations from a woman with no proof. "I have testimony. I have witnesses. I have a pattern of behavior that speaks for itself." "You have fairy tales and speculation." Rourke's voice hardened. "I'm giving you one chance, Lydia. Walk away now, and I won't press charges for breaking and entering. Stay, and I'll have the sheriff drag you out in chains." "Then send for the sheriff. Let's see if he's willing to arrest me in front of a federal judge and half the territorial press." Rourke's jaw worked. He glanced at the reporters, clearly calculating. Then he turned to Dutch. "Remove her from the premises. Use whatever force is necessary." Dutch grinned and started forward. His men followed. Jonah stepped in front of Lydia, rifle coming up. "That's close enough," Jonah said. "You going to shoot all of us, Pike? You're outnumbered 3-1. "Don't need to shoot all of you. Just need to shoot the first man who touches her. The rest of you can explain to a judge why you participated in an armed assault on a woman defending her legal property." "Legal property," Rourke laughed. "You keep using those words. They don't mean what you think they mean." "Maybe not, but I know what they'll mean in tomorrow's newspapers. Wealthy land baron uses armed force to evict woman from family home. That going to help your business relationships, Rourke? Your political connections?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Rourke's face. He looked at the reporters again, saw them scribbling notes, saw the surveyor carefully documenting everything. This was supposed to be simple. Send men, remove the problem, move on. Instead, he was in the middle of a public spectacle. "You're making a mistake," Rourke said to Lydia. "A costly one." "I've already lost everything. What else can you take?" "Your life, your freedom, the lives of everyone standing with you." "Then do it, right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses. Show everyone exactly who Calvin Rourke really is." The standoff stretched. Dutch's hand hovered near his gun. Jonah's rifle stayed steady. The reporters watched, pens poised, and somewhere in the distance, Lydia heard the sound of more horses approaching. A group of riders appeared from the north, not Rourke's men. These were different. At the head rode a woman in her 50s, stern-faced and straight-backed. Behind her came maybe 20 more people. Townspeople from Copperfield, Lydia realized with shock. People she recognized from church, from the general store, from the post office. The woman dismounted and walked straight to Lydia. "Miss Hart, I'm Margaret Collins. We haven't spoken before, but I knew your father." "Mrs. Collins, you shouldn't be here. This could get dangerous." "That's exactly why we're here." Margaret turned to face Rourke. "My husband and I owe the Harts a debt. Thomas helped us when our farm nearly failed 10 years ago. Loaned us money, no interest, just told us to pay it back when we could. We did, but we never forgot. Neither did a lot of other people." More of the townspeople were dismounting, forming up beside Lydia's small group. A man in his 30s stepped forward. Lydia vaguely recognized him as the blacksmith's son. "My father worked for Thomas Hart one summer," he said. "Said he was the fairest employer he ever had. When we heard what Rourke did to you, Miss Hart, what he tried to force you into, well, some of us thought that wasn't right." An older woman, heavy-set and fierce-looking, joined them. "I was at your wedding, girl. Saw you fall in that mud. Saw Rourke stand there and do nothing. Laughed about it myself at the time, I'm ashamed to say. But then I got to thinking about what kind of man watches his bride-to-be humiliated and doesn't even offer a hand. What kind of man that says about him." One by one, they came forward. Not everyone from Copperfield, not even close, but enough. 20 people who decided that maybe the joke had gone too far, that maybe Lydia Hart deserved better than to be the town's punching bag. Rourke's face had gone red. "This is trespassing, all of you. I can have you all arrested." "For what?" Margaret Collins folded her arms. "Standing on public land? Because that property line runs right through where you're standing, Rourke. We checked the survey markers. We're not on your land, we're on the county easement." "This is absurd. You people don't know what you're doing." "We know exactly what we're doing. We're witnessing, that's all. If Miss Hart wants to reclaim her property, we're here to see that she does it safely and legally." Rourke turned to Dutch. "I said remove them." Dutch looked at the crowd, now 40 people strong, maybe more, and his grin faded. "That's a lot of witnesses, boss. A lot of people who'll remember what happened here." "I don't pay you to think. I pay you to follow orders. You pay me to do smart work, not suicide work. I push this. We're looking at a massacre. That what you want written about in every paper from here to San Francisco?" Rourke's hands clenched and unclenched. Lydia could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Weighing options, measuring risks, trying to find an angle that didn't end with his reputation destroyed. Finally, he pointed at Lydia. "This isn't over. The hearing hasn't concluded. Judge Morrison will rule on the legality of the seizure, and when he does, I'll be back with proper legal authority. Then we'll see how many of your friends still want to stand with you." "I'll be waiting," Lydia said. Rourke remounted his horse. For a moment, Lydia thought he might order the charge anyway. Witnesses be damned. But he jerked the reins and rode off, his men following. Dutch was the last to leave, and he looked back once, eyes promising future violence. When they were gone, the tension broke. Someone laughed, nervous, relieved. Others joined in. Margaret Collins put a hand on Lydia's shoulder. "You've got guts, girl, more than I gave you credit for." "I've got desperation. Sometimes that looks the same." "Whatever it is, you made Rourke back down. That's more than most people can say." The reporters were already drafting their stories, comparing notes, or arguing about headlines. The surveyor confirmed that Lydia was legally within the property boundaries and that her occupancy was documented. Sam lowered his rifle for the first time in an hour. "Well," he said, "that could have gone worse." "It's not over," Jonah warned. "Rourke will be back. With lawyers, with the sheriff, with whatever it takes. Let him come. Next time we'll be ready." Lydia walked back into the house. It was hers again, at least for the moment. How long that moment would last depended on Judge Morrison's ruling, on Rourke's next move, on 100 variables she couldn't control. But for right now, she was home. That afternoon, word came from Deer Lodge. Judge Morrison had issued his preliminary ruling. Lydia read it 3 times, hardly believing the words. After reviewing the testimony and evidence presented, this court finds sufficient grounds to question the legality of the property. Seizure in question. While the debts claimed by Mr. Rourke appear legitimate on their face, the speed and coordination of the seizure raises concerns about proper procedure and due process. Furthermore, the testimony regarding missing documentation of mineral rights, while circumstantial, presents questions that warrant further investigation. This court orders the Territorial Office to conduct a thorough audit of all records related to the Hart property, with particular attention to any evidence of document removal or tampering. In the interim, possession of the property in question is returned to Miss Lydia Hart, pending final resolution of all claims. Mr. Rourke's seizure is hereby suspended, and any attempt to remove Miss Hart from the property without proper legal authority will be considered contempt of this court. The matter will proceed to full trial in 60 days, at which time both parties will have opportunity to present complete evidence and testimony. Chen arrived at sunset, waving the official copy. "We did it. Not a complete victory, but enough. You get to keep the land while the investigation proceeds." "And the investigation?" Lydia asked. "What are the odds they find anything?" "Better than they were yesterday. Morrison's order carries weight. The Territorial Office will have to take it seriously, and with all the press attention, they can't just bury it quietly." "But Rourke still has influence, still has money, still has connections." "Yes, which is why the next 60 days are crucial. We need to find proof, real, tangible proof, of what your father discovered and what Rourke did." Jonah had been quiet through all of this, standing at the window and watching the road. Now he turned. "I know where to look." Everyone stared at him. "What?" "Your father's surveys, the mineral tests. He wouldn't have filed them with the Territorial Office without keeping copies for himself. That's basic sense. So where would he have hidden them?" Lydia thought about it. Her father had been careful, methodical. If he discovered something valuable, he would have protected that information. The house? But Rourke's men searched it. They searched for obvious hiding places. But your father built this house. He'd know how to hide something where only someone who knew the construction could find it. They spent the evening searching, not tearing things apart, but carefully examining the structure itself. Jonah ran his hands along walls, checking for hollow spaces. Sam tested floorboards, looking for ones that didn't sit quite right. Lydia went through her father's bedroom trying to think like him, to remember his habits. It was nearly midnight when she found it. A loose board in the closet floor, but not accidentally loose, deliberately cut to lift out. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather document case. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were papers, survey notes, mineral assay results, hand-drawn maps marking locations across the property, and a letter addressed to Lydia in her father's handwriting. "My dearest Lydia, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I hope I'm wrong to be this cautious, but recent events have made me careful. The land I'm leaving you contains more value than anyone knows. I've documented everything, the mineral deposits, the surveys, the estimated worth. All of it is yours. Be careful who you trust. There are men who would take this from you if they knew. I've filed copies with the Territorial Office, but I don't trust that those records won't disappear. These are your insurance. You're stronger than you know.
Smarter than you give yourself credit for. Don't let anyone make you believe you're less than you are. Build a good life. That's all I ever wanted for you. Your loving father, Thomas Hart. Lydia read it twice, tears streaming down her face. Jonah and Sam crowded close, examining the documents. This is it, Chen breathed. This is everything we need. Assay results showing copper and silver deposits. Survey maps. Your father's documented discovery process. He looked up, eyes bright. This proves the mineral rights existed, and the fact that the filed copies disappeared while these survived proves someone deliberately destroyed public records. Will it be enough? Lydia asked. More than enough. This is evidence of fraud, theft of public records, conspiracy. Rourke won't be able to explain this away. They worked through the night, making copies of everything, documenting each piece of evidence. By dawn, they had a case that could actually win. Not just speculation and testimony, but hard proof. The trial, when it finally came 60 days later, was anticlimactic. Rourke's lawyers tried every tactic they could think of, but the evidence was overwhelming. The surveys were authenticated. Handwriting experts confirmed they were Thomas Hart's work. The territorial office admitted that records had been improperly handled. And under pressure, one of Rourke's former employees broke and testified that Rourke had ordered the documentation destroyed. The testimony about Thomas Hart's death was harder to prove. The doctor who treated him was long dead, but the pattern was damning. 3 men who'd opposed Rourke, all dead of fever within months of each other, all their properties subsequently acquired by Rourke at below-market prices. The judge didn't rule it murder, but he noted the suspicious circumstances in his findings. The verdict took the jury 4 hours. Guilty on fraud charges. Guilty on theft of public records. Guilty on conspiracy to deprive Lydia Hart of her legal property. The mineral rights were confirmed as legitimate and returned to Lydia's ownership. Rourke's seizure was ruled illegal, and he was ordered to pay restitution for damages. More importantly, the territorial governor opened investigations into Rourke's other land acquisitions. His political allies suddenly became scarce as they scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Banks called in his loans. Business partners found reasons to dissolve their arrangements. Calvin Rourke didn't go to prison. Men with his connections rarely did. But his empire crumbled. Within a year, he'd sold off most of his holdings and left Montana entirely, a broken man who'd finally pushed too far and found consequences waiting. Lydia stood on the porch of her father's house, her house now, legally and completely, and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The land stretched out before her, 40 acres that had cost so much and meant even more. Jonah joined her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He'd been staying in the small cabin Sam had helped them build on the back corner of the property. Nothing romantic between them, not yet. They were both too damaged, too cautious for that. But something was there, growing slowly, built on shared struggle and mutual respect. Sam's heading north next week, Jonah said. Wants to check on that friend near the border, make sure he's settled. He's welcome to stay here, there's room. I told him that. He said he appreciates it, but he's not ready to stop moving yet. Some people just need to keep drifting. Lydia sipped her coffee. What about you? You ready to stop? Jonah was quiet for a long time. I don't know. Been drifting most of my life. Not sure I remember how to stay in one place. You could learn, if you wanted. Is that an invitation? It's a possibility. No pressure. Just, if you wanted to stick around while I figure out what to do with 40 acres and mineral rights, I wouldn't object. He smiled. I might take you up on that. The mineral surveys had been accurate. A mining company out of Denver made Lydia an offer for the rights. Not a fortune, but enough to live comfortably, to pay off the remaining debts, to finally stop fighting just to survive. She'd negotiated hard, unwilling to let anyone take advantage of her again. The final agreement gave her a percentage of the profits, with provisions that protected local workers and the environment. With the money, she'd made changes, hired people from Copperfield to help work the land, paid fair wages, the kind her father would have approved of, started a small school for children whose families couldn't afford proper education. Nothing grand or showy, just quiet investments in the community that had finally stood up for her when it mattered. Margaret Collins had become an unexpected friend. She'd helped Lydia navigate the social complexities of a town that didn't quite know how to relate to the woman who'd gone from joke to victor in a matter of months.
Some people were genuinely apologetic for their past cruelty. Others were resentful, angry that she'd risen above her station. Lydia learned to distinguish between the two and spend her time accordingly. The reporters who'd covered the trial had made her briefly famous. Stories about her fight against Rourke ran in papers across the territory and beyond. She received letters from other women in similar situations, asking for advice, for help, for hope. She answered what she could, directed others to Marcus Chen, who'd built a practice around helping people fight corrupt land seizures. But fame faded, as it always did. Within 6 months, new scandals had captured public attention. Lydia was fine with that. She'd never wanted to be famous. She just wanted to be free. A year after the trial, on an afternoon when spring was giving way to summer and the whole world felt new, Lydia rode to the hill where her wedding wagon had collapsed. She'd avoided this place, the site of her greatest humiliation, but now she needed to see it again to measure the distance between who she'd been and who she'd become. The mud had dried and been washed away by a dozen rainstorms. New grass grew where she'd fallen. There was no marker, no sign that anything significant had happened here. Just a hill like any other. Lydia dismounted and stood at the top, looking down at Copperfield spread out below, the town that had laughed at her, the town where some people had finally stood up for her, the town that was complicated and flawed and human. She thought about the woman who'd lain in that mud, crushed by humiliation, watching her future husband do nothing. That woman had thought she had no choices, had believed survival meant submission. She'd been wrong about so many things. Footsteps behind her. Jonah, who'd followed at a distance, giving her space but staying close enough to matter. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah, I am." And she meant it. Not in the sense that everything was perfect. It wasn't. She still had debts to pay, challenges to face, hard days ahead. But she was standing on her own 2 feet, on land that was legally and morally hers, with choices that were genuinely her own.
"You know what I realized," Lydia said? "That fall, that moment when I was lying in the mud and everyone was laughing, that wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to me. It was the beginning of the best thing." "How do you figure?" "Because it woke me up, made me see what my life had become, what it would be if I kept going down that path. If the wagon hadn't collapsed, if I'd made it to the altar, if I'd said those vows." She shook her head. "I'd be Mrs. Calvin Rourke right now, living in his house, subject to his whims, slowly forgetting I'd ever been anything else. Instead, you're here, free. Free, broke, struggling, and somehow happier than I've been in years." Lydia laughed at the absurdity of it. "My father used to say that the worst disasters sometimes turn out to be blessings in disguise. I never understood that until now." They stood together on the hill, watching the sun sink lower. In the town below, lights were starting to appear in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys, life continued, ordinary and precious. "What happens now?" Jonah asked. "Now?" Lydia considered the question. "Now we go home. We have dinner, we make plans for spring planting. We live our lives on our own terms." She turned to him. "Is that enough?" "It's more than enough. It's everything." They rode back to the house as twilight deepened into night.
The small cabin they'd built for Jonah was dark. He'd been spending more time in the main house lately, helping with repairs, sharing meals, staying close. Neither of them had acknowledged what was growing between them. Neither needed to. Some things didn't require words. In the months that followed, life settled into a rhythm. Planting season came and went. The mining operation on the back 40 acres started production, and the first profit checks arrived. Smaller than Lydia had hoped, but regular, dependable. She put the money back into the land, into improvements and investments, and building something lasting. Sam returned from the north in late summer, looking healthier and happier. He moved into the cabin Jonah had vacated, claimed he was just visiting for a few weeks, and never quite left. The three of them worked the land together, an unlikely family bound by shared struggle and mutual respect. Marcus Chen visited occasionally, always bringing news of other cases, other people fighting battles similar to Lydia's. Some won, some lost. The law was imperfect, he reminded her, but it was still worth fighting through when it worked. Henry Watts retired from the territorial office and moved to a small house in Deer Lodge. He sent Lydia a letter saying that helping her had been the most meaningful thing he'd done in decades of public service. She wrote back, thanking him, inviting him to visit whenever he wanted. The people of Copperfield slowly adjusted to the new reality. Some of them sought Lydia out, apologizing for their past cruelty, asking if she could find it in her heart to forgive. She did mostly, though forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Others stayed resentful, angry that the joke of the town had become its most successful landowner. Lydia learned not to care what they thought. And one evening in late autumn, with the first snow dusting the peaks and the house warm with firelight, Jonah asked Lydia to marry him. Not with a contract, not with terms and conditions, just a simple question, asked in the kitchen while they were washing dishes. So casual and natural it took her a moment to realize what he'd said. Yes, she answered, just as simple, just as natural. They married in the spring, on the hill where her first wedding had ended in disaster. But this time, there was no wagon, no parade, no crowd of spectators hoping for entertainment. Just the two of them, Sam and Margaret as witnesses, and a traveling minister who asked no questions and offered genuine blessing. Lydia wore a simple dress she'd made herself. Jonah wore his good shirt, the one without patches. They spoke their vows looking at each other, not at an audience, and when Jonah kissed her, she felt no shame, no fear, no calculation, just joy. Afterward, they had dinner at the house with Sam and Margaret and a handful of friends who'd proven themselves true. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else had whiskey. They danced on the porch while the sun set and the stars came out, and Lydia thought about how far she'd come from that desperate woman in the mud. Years passed. The mining operation proved successful enough to provide steady income. Lydia expanded the school, hired a real teacher, made sure every child in the district who wanted an education could get one. She and Jonah had children of their own, 2 daughters who inherited their mother's stubborn streak and their father's quiet strength. The story of her fight against Rourke became local legend, the details growing more dramatic with each retelling. Lydia didn't correct the embellishments. Let people have their stories. The truth was impressive enough without exaggeration, but if they needed to make it epic, that was fine. Calvin Rourke died somewhere back east, broke and forgotten. Lydia read the obituary with no particular feeling. He'd been a monster in her life once, but she'd slain that monster. Now he was just a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when power went unchecked. On her 40th birthday, Lydia rode back to the hill one final time. Alone this time, just her and the memories. The town looked different now, bigger, more prosperous, changed by time and progress. But the hill was the same. The place where she'd fallen and where, in falling, she'd found the strength to stand. She thought about the girl she'd been. Desperate, cornered, convinced she had no choices. That girl had been wrong about so many things, but she'd been right about one. Survival wasn't enough. Living required more than just breathing. It required choice, agency, the willingness to fight for something better, even when the odds were impossible. Lydia dismounted and stood at the spot where the wagon had tipped, the exact location where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. She'd spent years being angry about that moment, then grateful for it, and finally understanding that it was just a moment. What mattered wasn't the fall. It was what she'd done after. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that took her breath away. In the distance, she could see her house, smoke rising from the chimney where Jonah would be starting dinner. Her daughters would be finishing their lessons or playing in the yard. Sam would be on the porch, watching the road out of habit, even though the days of needing to watch for threats were long past. She had built a life, not the one she'd expected, not the one others had tried to force on her, but one that was genuinely hers. Built on her terms, by her choices, answering to no one but herself and the people she'd chosen to let matter. The fall had sparked a war, but the war had led to victory, and victory had led to this, standing on a hill in the Montana twilight, free and whole, and exactly where she was supposed to be. Lydia mounted her horse and turned for home. Behind her, the hill stood silent, holding its secrets and its memories. She didn't look back. There was nothing there she needed anymore. Everything that mattered was ahead of her, waiting in a house she'd fought to keep, surrounded by people she'd chosen to love, living a life she'd built from the ruins of her darkest moment. They'd said she'd marry a monster to save herself. They'd been half right. She'd faced a monster and refused to be saved by submission. Instead, she'd saved herself, standing when everyone expected her to break, fighting when wisdom suggested surrender, proving that sometimes the people who fall the hardest are the ones who learn to fly. The end.